Chapter 560. In addition to this green forest boa, they also have 3 green forest boas here. But none of them have reached adulthood. That is to say, their body length hasn't reached 3 meters. These small snakes can't be sold at a high price. But if you want to sell a beast, you have to get a big guy like this. When Jiang Hai heard that this big guy was only $10,000, he was stunned for a moment. It was really cheap. In the Amazon rainforest of South America, this kind of creature could be said to be at the top of the food chain. It was very powerful, and everything was its food, including crocodiles, wild boars, and piranhas. However, as an aside, anyone who has raised piranhas knows that piranhas are actually very weak. They are so timid that it makes one's hair stand on end. Not only were they unable to beat the average domesticated cichlids, such as maps and arhats, but they were also very cowardly. As long as people put their hands in the fish tank, they would run to the corner and gather together. They were not aggressive at all. In the southern United States, wild piranhas were similar to domesticated ones. People who fell into the river would be eaten. This had never happened at all. Even if it was a living creature, such as a sheep or a cow, if it crossed the river alive, the piranhas would basically not attack it because they were very afraid. But if the dead body or the animal was injured and had blood on it, the situation would be different. There was a very popular video on the internet. It said that a little girl used a piece of meat to catch a big bucket of piranhas. Although it was a little exaggerated, it was also true. The piranhas would attack crazily when they touched food. But this kind of fish was actually food for other animals in the Amazon. Crocodiles would eat them. The green forest boas would eat them. Some bigger fish would also eat them. For example, the giant bony-tongue fish raised in Jiang Hai's house before it mutated, and the gars, which were more like crocodiles than crocodiles, would all eat these guys. Therefore, piranhas were not a powerful species. The top of the food chain in South America was this kind of green sea boa. Looking at this guy, Jiang Hai made a mental note to buy it when he left. After walking past the cages of the lush forest boa, Jiang Hai lost interest in the snakes behind them. These people caught animals to sell, not to kill themselves. Therefore, there were no poisonous snakes here. There was only one type of real poisonous snake, the king cobra. Other than that, they were all pythons. However, Jiang Hai had already seen the lush forest boa, so he wasn't interested in these Burmese pythons, and even the golden python. Soon, they walked past the area where the snakes were kept. Jiang Hai was also not interested in the frogs behind them. However, when they walked past the crocodiles, Jiang Hai's interest was aroused again. For this kind of monster that had existed since the age of dinosaurs, Jiang Hai was quite interested in crocodiles. And these people were indeed quite capable. They caught dozens of crocodiles, big and small. When they went to the zoo last time, the man had already introduced them to Jiang Hai. Crocodiles were divided into 2 types, the da and the crocodile. The da was basically smaller, and the crocodile was bigger. Now there were basically all kinds of crocodiles caught here. However, the most famous da was the Yangtze crocodile in Huaxia. It was not available here. What a joke! This thing was already not available in China. It was really whimsical for the Americans to want to poach it in China. Jiang Hai was not very interested in the small crocodiles, but he was very interested in the biggest crocodile at the front. When he saw Jiang Hai's gaze, Barton, as the shopping guide, naturally played the role of introducing him. This is the Gulf crocodile, the biggest crocodile in the world. Of course, this one is definitely not the Gulf crocodile, but this guy is 4 meters long, so it's not small. We got it from Indonesia. In order to catch this guy, we spent a lot of effort. If you want $40,000. After hearing what Jiang Hai said, Barton introduced the crocodile to him. In fact, this crocodile was indeed from Indonesia, but it was not worth $40,000 at all, because this crocodile was farmed. Yes, the Gulf crocodile in the world was now classified as vulnerable, and the countries that had this kind of crocodile had listed it as a protected animal. But the countries in Southeast Asia were not so sure. The most important thing was that they could make money. For them, it was best if they could sell wild animals for money. But in recent years, as the number of wild animals in the wild decreased, they started to pay attention to farming. This was especially true for crocodiles. This kind of animal had a high economic value because crocodile skin was the best material for making leather goods, bags, and shoes. It was much better than cow skin. In recent years, eating crocodile meat had become popular in Southeast Asia and the Asian region, so crocodile meat was also sold. Many countries in Southeast Asia had a large number of crocodile farms. This big guy was actually taken from a farm. It was originally kept as a breeding crocodile. After all, it was not easy to grow so big. But this guy actually escaped. After it was caught, the people from this organization happened to come across it and bought it for $2,000. $1 was equivalent to more than 2,000 Indonesian rupees. And $1 was equivalent to more than 13,600 Indonesian rupees. For the people over there, $2,000 was a huge sum of money. So they sold it without hesitation. Of course, it took a lot of effort for these people to transport this thing back. But if they really sold it for $40,000, it would be a huge profit. And Jiang Hai did not know the price of these things. Hearing Barton's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but ponder for a moment. Although he didn't know if he was being cheated or not, this amount of money was indeed a small amount for him. It was understandable for him to spend this money to buy some animals he liked. So now, he was calculating in his heart, what exactly was he going to buy? This was a problem. Seeing Jiang Hai deep in thought, Barton also knew that now was not the time to disturb Jiang Hai. He stood quietly on the side, waiting for Jiang Hai to make a decision. But at this time, the originally closed door was suddenly pushed open. Clang! The door heavily slammed against the wall on the other side of the warehouse. Then, a black man about 2 meters tall walked in with a bottle of wine in his hand. When he saw Jiang Hai's group, his eyebrows raised. But when he saw Azalina behind Jiang Hai, his eyebrows turned into a trace of lust. Then he walked over. "Hey big brother, you came back after drinking?" Seeing the burly man come in, Barton immediately greeted him with an obsequious smile. However, the burly man didn't pay attention to him as he pushed him aside. Then the burly man walked towards Jiang Hai and took a deep breath. Then he smiled at Jiang Hai and said, "Brother Jiang Hai, I've been waiting for you." "Boy, what are you doing here?" Hearing the voice mixed with the smell of alcohol and bad breath, Jiang Hai frowned. "We are here to buy something. Is there a problem?" Waving his hand, Jiang Hai didn't care if this guy understood what he meant, and directly said to him. After staying in the United States for a year, Jiang Hai was already very familiar with the tricks of these beauties. In front of them, when you should be tough, you should be tough. When you shouldn't be tough, you should also be tough. Otherwise, they will think that you are easy to bully. Besides, Jiang Hai also has the capital to be tough. Those billions of savings are not a joke. "What's the problem?" "I'm telling you, the problem is big. I don't want to do business with you, get lost." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the drunkard here opened his mouth and said to Jiang Hai while breathing out the smell of alcohol. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's eyes flashed, but then he smiled. "It's not a big deal if he doesn't want to do business with you. The things are yours. It's up to you whether you want to sell them or not. Let's go." Since someone came to disturb the situation, Jiang Hai didn't have to buy these things. Since they are not going to make money, Jiang Hai didn't want to stay here any longer. He waved his hand and prepared to leave. "Wait a minute. Do you think you can come and go as you please?" Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to leave, the drunkard suddenly said, then stopped in front of Jiang Hai with an evil smile, and pointed at Jiang Hai arrogantly. "What do you mean by this?" Now Jiang Hai can tell that this guy is looking for trouble. If he just drank too much and didn't want to sell his things, then Jiang Hai won't bother with him. But if he's looking for trouble, then Jiang Hai will let him know what it means to be stubborn. "What do you mean? You've been here for so long. Don't you need to spend money? You have to spend money to go to the zoo. $100,000 per person. Take it out. Get lost if you can't take it out. Leave this woman here, go raise the money." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the drunkard didn't care. He walked towards Jiang Hai and said with a smirk on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai and the others couldn't help but look at each other. Then they all laughed unconsciously. "I'm laughing at your M13. Looking at the mocking smile on Jiang Hai and the others' faces. This made the drunkard quite unhappy. He glared at them, and then shouted loudly, Hearing his words, Jiang Hai raised the glasses on his face, the glasses he bought in the beginning. This pair of glasses has a camera function. Originally, Jiang Hai wore it for fun, but now it seems that this is called evidence. I'm laughing at you, you son of a B*TCH. When your mother gave birth to you, did she throw you away and raise the placenta? I really feel that your IQ is the lowest among all the animals in this house. Even the cockroaches over there are smarter than you. Also, idiot 13, you have bad breath, stay away from me. Looking at this guy, Jiang Hai glanced at him contemptuously, then said with a face of disgust. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the black man who was scolded was stunned. After he reacted, he was instantly furious. He raised his fist and punched Jiang Hai's face heavily. Chapter 561. This black man's name was Fields Chowkley. He was different from the average Native American. He was actually an African. When he was 12 years old, he saved the life of the former leader of this poaching organization and killed a leopard that wanted to eat him. At that time, the former leader felt that this kid was ruthless and strong enough, so he brought him to the United States. He raised the organization with his son. Before the new year, the former leader retired and handed the organization over to his son. Fields Chowkley, who was his godson, was only second to one in the organization and above everyone else. He came to the United States at the age of 12. He was not interested in learning about culture, but he had been studying combat and fighting. When he was 15, he had fought in New York's underground boxing ring. When he was 20, he had killed 3 forest rangers in Africa on his first mission. He was 30 years old this year. His body was at its peak, and his experience was at its maximum. He was also at his most ruthless and merciless. Usually he was lawless, but he knew his own situation. His brain wasn't very good, so he wasn't that ambitious. Other than money, women, blood and alcohol, he wasn't interested in power. The reason why the organization wanted him was because he was a top fighter, so the leader naturally trusted him very much. He even called the subordinates of this organization to call Fields Chowkley Big Brother. It was because of this that this man was quite arrogant here. He could not remember how long it had been since someone dared to talk to him like Jiang Hai, but it did not mean that he would not teach Jiang Hai a lesson if he dared to talk to him like this. In his eyes, Jiang Hai's head would probably be directly flattened by his punch. Fortunately, he still held back and didn't hit Jiang Hai's temple. He only hit Jiang Hai's face. If Jiang Hai died, there would be some trouble. He might have to hide abroad for 8 to 10 years. But it didn't matter if he only injured Jiang Hai. In his view, Jiang Hai was motionless at this time. That meant he was scared silly. This yellow-skinned guy was too cowardly. This reminded him of the possums on the grassland. The courage of those little guys might be about the same as Jiang Hai. However, just when he felt that his fist was only a few centimeters away from hitting Jiang Hai's face, he suddenly stopped. It seems that you really don't want to live. Looking at the fist in front of him, Jiang Hai chuckled and said coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, he kicked Fields in the stomach. In an instant, Fields flew backward as if he had been hit by a car, knocking over many cages. Fortunately, the cages he knocked over were not big guys, and the quality of the cages was good, so the animals were not released. Even so, all the animals in the room began to scream in pain. Hearing the screams of the animals, the guards outside immediately reacted and rushed in to see the situation. Do it! Since the fight had already started, Jiang Hai would not be polite to these guys. He looked at the first person who rushed in and saw that Fields was lying there, not knowing if he was dead or alive. Without saying a word, he immediately raised the gun in his hand. These guys more or less had some military background, and the weapons in their hands were all automatic weapons. Although it was the oldest model of the M16, the bullets coming at them were no joke. Although there was a big gap between the first generation and the fourth generation, the gap was not to the point where it could not kill people. Unfortunately, as soon as the bullets were fired, Bell had already pulled out his gun in an instant. Without even looking, he went up and fired 3 shots. Then, the man fell down with an incredulous look on his face. When he fell down, the 3 spots of blood on his chest gradually oozed out. The man's fall caused more people to rush in from outside. Unfortunately, the door was only so big. Jiang Hai and Azalina also pulled out their guns in an instant. As long as they guarded the door, the enemies would not be able to come in. Barton was about to move at this time, but Conrad had already rushed in. This time, his fist was as big as a pot. With a bang, his fist smashed into the man's face. Barton spun 4 or 5 times in the air before landing heavily on the ground. As for Philemon, he had already squatted in a corner. He knew that whether it was Jiang Hai, the woman, the big guy, or Belle, no one could deal with them easily. They were not people that ordinary people could deal with. What he needed to do was to protect himself. That was all. This warehouse was built very sturdily. No one could get in from outside. Jiang Hai and the other 2 were standing at the door. Even if they only had pistols, the people outside would not be able to rush in. They could only keep shooting at the door. Although they could not hit Jiang Hai and the others, the animals near the door were in big trouble. They were all in cages and could not escape. The bullets were fired one after another. Many animals fell in a pool of blood. The threat of death and the existence of blood made the remaining animals go crazy. But it still had no effect. For a while the people on both sides were in a deadlock. While reloading, Jiang Hai also squatted down and looked at Philemon next to him. "Call the police." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philemon also took out his mobile phone and called the police. There were more than a dozen people outside. Jiang Hai was not going to fight them head-on. Who knew if they had reinforcements? The call was quickly connected. After hearing the gunshots, the police did not say anything. They asked for the address and immediately dispatched the police. This was a shooting, and the victim was a rich man from Winthrop. They had to deal with this matter carefully. If there was any bad influence, it would be big trouble. In fact, they did not know that if they provoked Jiang Hai, they would be in big trouble. After confirming that the police were coming, Jiang Hai also called Moses Adams. Today people died. Although the people who died were from the other side, Jiang Hai and the others were justified in self-defense. However, it was better to have a lawyer. When Moses Adams heard Jiang Hai's gunfire, he knew that something must have happened to Jiang Hai. He immediately drove from Boston to the town. Although the warehouse where Jiang Hai and the others were in was a relatively remote place, it was at the back of the town. The town's police rushed over immediately. When the people outside heard the police alarm, they were already panicking. At this time, they could not rush into the warehouse. If they rushed in, they would really die. That meant that they had no way to take hostages, and there were police outside. It seemed that they were in trouble. Just as these people were thinking about whether to escape or surrender, the police had already made a move. The person inside was Jiang Hai, the richest man in Winthrop. He had just prepared to spend tens of millions to buy cattle in their town. They had to pay taxes. At this time, if something happened to Jiang Hai, they would probably lose their jobs. Most importantly, they had already confirmed that Jiang Hai and the others were in the warehouse. The problem was not big, so what were they waiting for? Without saying anything, the police outside directly knocked down the door of the first warehouse. Before these poachers could figure out what was going on, a few of them had already been beaten down by the police who rushed in. They looked at their teammates lying in a pool of blood. These people understood that they could not win, so they surrendered. Anyway, they were just selling wild animals. Even if they were arrested, they would be released after 3 to 5 years. This was considered a relatively small crime. As underlings, it was not worthwhile for them to risk their lives for 3 to 5 years. They were only responsible for guarding the prisoners, and they did not have any lives in their hands. With the first person surrendering, the others followed. When the police shouted, and the people outside were under control, Jiang Hai and the others also breathed a sigh of relief. Jiang Hai also smacked his lips at this time. He originally wanted to buy some wild animals back, but now it seemed that wild animals were almost all dead. Those that were not dead were probably taken to places like the zoo. He and these guys were not fated to be together. Especially the beasts that Jiang Hai had his eyes on: black leopards, tigers, and lions. At this time they were either dead or injured. When Jiang Hai turned his head, he found that the cages of the crocodile and the green forest boa not far behind him were also shot through. The green forest boa was shot 3 times, but the snake's vitality was still very strong, and it was still there tenaciously moving. As for the bay crocodile, it was not better. It was also shot twice. At this time it was lying there motionless. It depends on your luck. To be honest, Jiang Hai likes these 2 animals very much. He hesitated for a moment, but before the police rushed in, he separated a part of his aura and sent it into the bodies of the 2 animals. The moment the 2 animals finished absorbing the aura, Jiang Hai immediately released his aura. The police also rushed in. Jiang Hai and the others were very cooperative and threw the gun away, then squatted down with their hands on their heads. Although Jiang Hai didn't want to lose face like this, he didn't want any young people to take things too hard and shoot him. How wronged would that be? When in the police station, when Moses Adams was there, Jiang Hai could be arrogant. But now he was not in the police station. He was facing the black muzzle of a gun. At this time, it would not be wrong to be afraid. After the police came in, they first took control of Jiang Hai and the others, then checked the injuries of Barton and the man who was kicked by Jiang Hai, and immediately called an ambulance. Then Jiang Hai and the dozen people who had their guns taken away were taken to the police station together. Chapter 562. Boss, you really know how to take care of my business. Walking out of the police station, Moses Adams said helplessly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai smiled and then stretched. Well, you are my personal lawyer. If I don't take care of your business, whose business should I take care of? Hearing Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai put his arm around his shoulder and shook him hard. Moses Adams rolled his eyes. After the battle in the warehouse, Jiang Hai and the others were taken to the police station by the police. But as the saying goes, rich people have privileges everywhere. Before entering the police station, Jiang Hai and the others were still very cowardly. But after entering the police station, Jiang Hai and the others instantly became arrogant. When the police chief here learned about Jiang Hai's identity, he specially arranged a separate office for Jiang Hai and the others to lock them up. It was an office, not a detention room, so those guys would stay in the detention room. Then he specially sent several good-tempered policemen in the police station to take statements for Jiang Hai and the others. Of course, this was only done after Moses Adams arrived. In fact, there was nothing much to say about it. Although there were no cameras in the warehouse, otherwise, Barton wouldn't have dared to steal a Greenland seal to sell last night. However, Jiang Hai's glasses have a video recording function. Basically, his glasses can explain everything. However, according to Moses Adams, Jiang Hai changed from a buyer to an animal conservationist. After learning that there were many wild animals here, he did not come to buy, but to save these animals. Although it was not right not to inform the police. After all, Jiang Ti's starting point was very moral. After hearing Jiang Hai's lie, Jiang Hai almost believed it. But by saying so, it was clear that he could clear himself. Jiang Hai was also happy to say so. Fortunately, he did not say anything about buying or not in the warehouse. There was no direct evidence to show that Jiang Hai was a buyer. This was the most important point. After taking the statements, Moses Adams directly sued these people, and the local government naturally also sued these people. If they were not caught selling wild animals privately, the U.S. government could pretend that they did not know. But now that they were caught, they must be in prison for a while. But as Moses Adams said, this was just a small crime. After all, they were only responsible for guarding, not arresting. At most, they were considered accomplices. So even in the U.S., this sentence was less than 5 years. If the performance was good, and the confession was made in time, 3 or 4 years would be enough for them to be released. But Barton and Fields, who were beaten up, would probably not be released for at least 10 years. But for Jiang Hai, these were indeed small crimes. Their biggest crime was the attempt to kidnap and murder Jiang Hai. Well, if you have a mind to pin a crime on someone, you can always find a way to pin a crime on someone. Jiang Hai wanted to pin a crime on them, but he was rich. Millions of dollars were spent on these people. Even if they died, they probably wouldn't understand how their original sentence of 3 or 4 years had inexplicably become 30 or 40 years. Catching these wild animals was a small crime, but offending Jiang Hai, Humph, this guy had never been a soft-hearted master. If you dared to offend him, you should be prepared to be skinned alive. The other party's lawyer had also come over after finding out that the den had been destroyed. However, after finding out that the person they had offended was a billionaire, the lawyer made a phone call and said a few words to these people before leaving immediately. Needless to say, he wanted these people to take the blame. The people behind him would not offend Jiang Hai for these people, especially in Massachusetts. Jiang Hai's power was not smaller than theirs. At the same time, Jiang Hai's money was more than theirs. Most importantly, Jiang Hai did not purposely go against them. If it weren't for their stupid teammate this time, Jiang Hai might have been their god of fortune. But after this happened, they could not come to Jiang Hai to cause trouble, nor could they come to Jiang Hai to settle it privately. The best way was to let these people take the blame and wait for the situation to calm down. Jiang Hai did not care about this. They did not want to cause trouble, and Jiang Hai did not need to provoke them. So after only appealing against these people, Jiang Hai had no intention of continuing to dig in. In fact, in Jiang Hai's opinion, the most unfortunate thing was those wild animals. He originally wanted to buy a lot of them, but the problem was that he came in the name of protecting the environment. So after the den was destroyed, all the wild animals were taken away by the rescue station. It was impossible to return them after their injuries were treated. These animals would probably grow old in zoos everywhere. It seemed that they were destined to not be with Jiang Hai. "Boss, I'm very hungry. When are we going to eat?" At this time Philemon, who came out from behind Jiang Hai, asked Jiang Hai helplessly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also waved his hand and went directly to the town's best restaurant. After arriving at the restaurant, Robbins Garcia, who had received the news, had been waiting there for a long time. He also learned that Jiang Hai and the others were in the police station, but to be honest, he was already a little used to it. When Jiang Hai was in the police station for the first time, he was more or less a little worried, but later, he was often in the police station, so it was not a big deal, because he knew that Jiang Hai would not be harmed by the police, and no police dared to provoke him. So after learning that Jiang Hai was in the police station, he just made a phone call. After learning that Moses Adams had come, he continued to collect cattle here. At this time, he had collected almost all the cattle today. "Boss, you really feel uncomfortable when you don't cause trouble for a few days." Now looking at the group of people walking over, Robbins Garcia couldn't help but smile and said to him. He knew that his boss was destined to not be easy to deal with. "Ha ha ha ha. Well, in fact, what I want to say is that they provoked me." Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but shake his head and smile. Although he was telling the truth, he really felt that what he said was a little fake no matter how he listened to it. Okay, let's not talk about it. Let's eat. Looking at the people around him, who didn't know whether to laugh or cry, Jiang Hai decided to put these annoying things aside for the time being. "Let's eat." So everyone walked into the restaurant and started eating. When Jiang Hai and the others arrived in this town, it wasn't noon yet, so they didn't eat. As a result, when they came out now, it was already past 5 o'clock in the evening. They hadn't eaten all day. To be honest, they could endure it, but they were also very hungry. Now that they saw the food, they immediately started cooking without hesitation. Although the taste of the best restaurant in this town was quite average, Jiang Hai and the others enjoyed it very much. After having a good meal, the matters here were handed over to Moses Adams, and Jiang Hai and the others got in the car and took the cattle back to the manor. This was the real purpose of their visit. When the cattle returned to the manor, it was already past 9 o'clock in the evening. Today, they didn't let the cattle adapt to the pasture, but instead let them return to the cowshed. As for Jiang Hai and the others, they also returned to their own rooms. But when Jiang Hai returned to his room, there were naturally two figures quietly staying in his room. Although Bernice's defenses were strict, she couldn't resist the existence of moles in the villa. Even if Daliana and Marian had a good relationship with Bernice, their closeness with Aphrodite and the others was unimaginable to Bernice. So every day, they would quietly open the window at the back of the villa, or let 1 or 2 people in according to Aphrodite's instructions when Bernice wasn't paying attention. The two of them would directly hide in Jiang Hai's room and not come out, just waiting for Jiang Hai to come back. After that, they would quietly leave Jiang Hai's villa in the morning before dawn, making Bernice always think that Jiang Hai still slept by himself at night. Tonight, after Jiang Hai came back, Hilda, Leonard, and Paige Hall, who were nestled in his bed, jumped out of bed. Looking at the two charming existences in front of him, Jiang Hai also smiled and took them to the bathroom first. The weather in Boston was still quite hot, and Jiang Hai also needed to take a good bath before going to bed. Of course, he didn't know what would happen during the bath and sleep. Anyway, Hilda and Paige's feelings for Jiang Hai were clear. As long as Jiang Hai said it, then they would complete it 120%. Even if Jiang Hai didn't say it, they would take the initiative to think about what Jiang Hai wanted them to do and complete it. This was their attitude towards Jiang Hai. The two people who came every day were also arranged by Aphrodite. One person really couldn't handle Jiang Hai. In fact, the two of them couldn't handle it now, but they might have a chance if they used the body concealing technique. Besides, if there were more people, it would be easy to be discovered by Bernice. Jiang Hai was still very satisfied with Aphrodite's considerate arrangement. It was said that the land of gentleness was the tomb of heroes. Jiang Hai never thought of himself as a hero, but this land of gentleness really made him feel very comfortable. The most important thing was that he didn't have to worry about the hygiene of these girls, nor did he have to worry about the status of these girls. Without any psychological burden, Jiang Hai's body and mind were comforted to the greatest extent. This kind of life was really great. The moon quietly hung in the middle of the sky, and then slowly set down. The one that replaced the moon in the sky was the sun. A new day came quietly without him noticing. When Jiang Hai woke up from his sleep, there was no one around him. This made him feel unreal, but he knew that what happened on the first day was real. At the very least, his slightly sore waist wasn't something that could be cured by sleeping. Chapter 563. Do I look good? Bernice was panting heavily as she looked at Jiang Hai, who was lying on a white jade recliner. She was sweating profusely as she looked at Jiang Hai, who seemed to be in a bad mood. Jiang Hai just chuckled. Don't misunderstand. The two of them were not doing anything at this time. Bernice's sweat was entirely due to exercise. Cough. Why does it seem to be getting more and more confusing? She was indeed exercising. Every morning, she would get up and exercise. After running for a bit, she would do a set of boxing moves. Although he didn't know what this set of boxing moves was, it seemed like it was very particular about the intensity of the body's training. After one round, her body would be covered with pearls and steaming hot. Of course, there was steam in early spring, late spring, or winter. It was now mid-September, but the temperature was still quite high. The highest temperature during the day was basically between 23 degrees and 25 degrees. It was slightly colder in the morning and evening, but it was still above 14 degrees. This temperature was not enough to make white smoke come out of people's heads. At this time, Bernice had just finished a round of boxing and was on the lawn in front of Jiang Hai's villa. Jiang Hai was half lying on the recliner at this time, watching her boxing there. He had to admit that although Bernice's body had not absorbed Jiang Hai's aura, the beef and fish she ate here all contained aura, and she had been exercising. Whether it was her figure or her skin, it was a level higher than when she came here. The black vest on her upper body was wrapped in a magnificent manner, and it seemed to be a size too big. Originally, Asian women were at a disadvantage on average, but at this time, Bernice seemed to have the intention of catching up with Europe and America. Even when facing Aphrodite and the others, who had already been developed by Jiang Hai, she was not afraid to give in. Of course, Jiang Hai was not too clear about the specific situation, but at least she looked very intimidating. Her waist was red outside, and there were also faintly visible four-pack abs. It was indeed very good. Her lower body was wrapped around her slender thighs, and there was also a round cough. In short, if Bernice's current photos were posted online, there would probably be another new generation of otaku goddesses. Compared to Bernice, Jiang Hai's attitude was much calmer. He used to get up and run every morning. First, it was because he wanted to have better control over his body. He wanted to become stronger. But later, he discovered that every time he leveled up, although his body's strength increased, he didn't lose control of his strength. In the past, when he practiced Bale's fighting techniques, Jiang Hai wanted to maximize his strength. But now his strength was 4 times that of a normal human being. With such strength, no matter how good his defensive skills were, his bones would still be broken. Strength was above all strategies. When one's strength had reached a state where the opponent could only hope to reach, all messy things would be like dust that would be blown away by a gust of wind. To give the simplest example, if a modern army that did not need to worry about supplies went to the Three Kingdoms era, there was no need for strategies, strategists, or fierce generals. Missiles would sweep a circle, planes would circle another circle, and finally tanks would advance with the army. Then it would be me and you, heart to heart, living together in the Earth Village. Therefore, Jiang Hai really didn't need to train anymore. In his opinion, there was no enemy that he couldn't defeat with one punch. If there was, then he would just use 2 punches. Such a change in mentality made him too lazy to study the problem of technique. The second reason was that Jiang Hai didn't have anyone by his side in the past, so he usually couldn't sleep well in the morning. There was always some insomnia, so in the morning, he would get up to run and walk around, which was equivalent to venting his excess energy. But now that there was no extra energy, Jiang Hai did not need to go there and bother. Is it okay? Look at it every day. You don't change your style. Hearing Bernice's words, if it was the previous Jiang Hai, he might be a little shy, but recently, Jiang Hai's posture had developed quite well, so his skin had become thicker unconsciously. What? You want me to practice in a bikini? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice rolled her eyes at him. She did not care about Jiang Hai's gaze at all. She directly picked up the grape juice he put on the table and took a sip. She did not mind that Jiang Hai had drunk it before. Jiang Hai not only left a lot of grapes to make wine, but he also squeezed a lot of them into juice to drink. It had to be admitted that the juice squeezed from this kind of wine grapes was inevitably not delicious because the grape skin was too thick, and the seeds were quite big. So if it was squeezed into juice, the taste would be particularly sour and astringent. But after Jiang Hai's spirit improved the grapes, they became much better. Instead, they were very sweet, and the grape juice squeezed out tasted quite good. What's so good about a bikini? It's not like I haven't seen it before. Picking up the grape juice put down by Bernice again, Jiang Hai said vaguely while drinking. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice couldn't help but pat Jiang Hai's leg with her hand. What? Do you still want to see me naked? If you want to see, then come to my room at night. I'm always a first-class sleeper. You're welcome to come and see. If you're beastly, I probably won't be your opponent. Just treat it as paying for the rent and food here. After listening to Jiang Hai's words, Bernice retorted quite fiercely, making Jiang Hai speechless. You are a female rogue. Sure enough, Jiang Hai always backed down at the critical moment. After snorting, Jiang Hai picked up the mobile phone and played games. Seeing Jiang Hai's fearless look, Bernice also snorted at him. Then she went into the room to take a shower. Looking at Bernice who was walking, Jiang Hai couldn't help smacking his lips. He mourned for Bernice's future husband for 3 seconds. Having such a strong wife may not be a good thing. But this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai for the time being. His recent demand for women had plummeted. For a man, it's very easy to be hot-blooded, or have some kind of bug take over his brain. But after that, a man often becomes a saint. He has no desires and no attack power. Although Jiang Hai can't be said to be a saint, his desires have indeed decreased a lot. In his opinion, living like this for the rest of his life is actually quite good. Boss, you are basking in the sun. Just as Jiang Hai was playing with his mobile phone and absorbing aura, Berkdal in the distance drove a huge tractor from a distance. The tractor was full of fresh grass. 1/3 of the grass was prepared for the cows in Jiang Hai's manor, and the other 2/3 were to be stored for Du Feimin. After Du Feimin left, Jiang Hai asked the cowboys in the manor to start storing the grass. In addition to the grass they needed to eat during the winter, Du Feimin's grass was also indispensable. He didn't know that the grass could be sold for money. A few days ago, Du Feimin called and said that his ranch was ready to operate. But after all, it was a super large ranch. Unlike Jianghai's ranch, it would take a long time for him to choose the land, build it and pick the cows. But Jianghai's ranch would have no problem storing the grass first. After his ranch was built, Jianghai's grass would be delivered to him. In the eyes of Berkdal and the others, it was no longer green grass growing in the manor, but green dollars. They really didn't think that Jianghai's grass could be sold at such a high price. It was really shocking. On the contrary, Jianghai was very calm, because he had long been sure that his grass could be sold for money. Hearing Berkdal's words, Jianghai sat up and asked him with a smile, "Well, yes. How are the new cows?" "The new cows are very adaptable. After all, we just started selling cows. Unlike last year, we didn't have a lot to choose from. The quality of this batch of cows is slightly better than last year's batch. I believe these cows won't let you down." Hearing Jianghai's words, Berkdal also smiled. A few days ago, Jianghai and the others had gone to buy cattle. Recently, the cattle had been delivered, including the breeding cattle they had selected. The edge of the manor's ranch had officially entered the development period. The cowboys, who had been idle for a while, were once again busy. Their income was directly linked to the cows. Since the cows were valuable, Jianghai gave them a lot of bonuses. Jianghai's salary wasn't the highest among the cowboys of the same kind, but it was still above average. However, Jianghai's bonus was a huge sum that no other cowboys in the country could get. This was also the reason why they were so loyal. After selling all the bulls from last year, Jianghai made a total of $1.47 billion. 700 million of that was to be kept for tax purposes. Of the remaining nearly $800 million, Jianghai took out $5 million in addition to the hundreds of thousands of dollars he gave them at the beginning. He was going to give them a year-end bonus during the new year. Jianghai only had 5 cowboys: Robbins Garcia, Berkdal, Philemon Turner, Harriman Fells, and Bell Lester. In other words, each of these 5 could get a year-end bonus of $1 million. Jianghai had inadvertently said this when he was drinking a while ago. After that, these people became even crazier. Since when could a cowboy earn more than $1.3 million a year? Even if they had to pay taxes, they would be happy. They used to pay the lowest level of taxes, but now they could pay the highest level. This was the difference. To be honest, although they hadn't received the money yet, they knew that Jianghai couldn't be wrong. Philemon even wanted his 2 sons to come over and be cowboys. What a joke. They worked outside and worked hard to earn $80,000 to $100,000 a year. The 2 of them added together didn't even make a fraction of what he, a laborer, made in a year. How embarrassing. Chapter 564. You're leaving in 2 days. Why don't you pack up? Bernice, who appeared in the first sentence of the second chapter, looked at Jianghai, who was teasing the Greenland seal. Well, it's now called Whitehair. She looked at Jianghai, who was teasing Whitehair, and couldn't help but shake her head helplessly. She had to admit that Jianghai, this guy in Bernice's eyes, didn't have the slightest bit of youthful vigor. Jianghai was really lazy, had no ambition, no fighting spirit, and didn't seem to have any hot-bloodedness. Ever since he came back from buying the cow, Jianghai had started the retirement mode of an old cadre. What he had to do every day was very simple. Get up in the morning. Well, he didn't get up in the morning anymore. He would get up at 9 o'clock, wash up, eat breakfast, and then go out for a ride on his 4-wheeled motorcycle. In fact, the most important thing was to go to the seaside to contact the dolphins and Big Idiot. Then he would go to the stable to ride Little Xia for a ride. After feeding some carrots, he would ride the small car back, lie down on his white jade recliner, and start playing games. Recently, Bernice found that Aphrodite and the others would no longer do anything that shouldn't happen with Jianghai in the bathroom. This made her feel very relieved, but she didn't know that the battlefield had already moved to Jianghai's bedroom. In this way, when the battle was over at night, Jianghai would hug the 2 girls and have a good night's sleep. The next day, it was the same as the first day. This state really made Bernice speechless, because there was really no trace of a young man on Jianghai. If it wasn't because she saw him every day, she would have thought that this guy was already in his 50s. Why was he so indifferent to everything? Young people have good things and bad things, but Jiang Hai didn't have any of them. This really made Bernice confused. The good side of young people was their ambition, fighting spirit, and fighting spirit. After all, they were still young. If they didn't work hard now, what would they do when they were old? This was also the foundation for young people to gain a foothold in this world. No matter what their goal is, a better life, a better partner, more money, a better future, etc. At this time, they would fight for their dreams, but Jiang Hai didn't have this intention at all. Ideal? According to Stephen Chow's words, a person without dreams was no different from a salted fish. There was not much difference between ideals and dreams. They were both goals that people worked hard for. In a novel, this was called the main plot. For example, if a person's engagement was broken off, he would swear to prove himself and prove that those who looked down on him were wrong. This was the main plot, the goal, the ideal, and the dream. Although Jiang Hai also wanted to burn for a while, suddenly one day, he realized that being a salted fish was actually quite good. It was fine if he didn't have any dreams, because he really didn't know what he wanted now. Power? He was not interested. Money? He was not short of money now. He had money, leisure, and women. Being a salted fish was not a big deal. Therefore, unless there was something urgent, Jiang Hai was really unwilling to change his lifestyle. But in Bernice's eyes, or maybe in the eyes of normal women, Jiang Hai was indeed a little too strange. Of course, people like Aphrodite and Daliana did not count because they worshipped and approved of Jiang Hai. If Jiang Hai farted and said it smelled good, they would say it smelled good. Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi were also different because they did not have a relationship with Jiang Hai in the beginning. Qi Li and Jiang Hai were also different because Qi Li was originally high and mighty, and Jiang Hai was her accessory. Suddenly, this accessory rebelled one day. Oh no, it was an uprising. And he even overrode her and saved her life. In addition, there was a messy and melodramatic storyline between the two, so no one knew what happened to them in the end. Because Xiaoyu was inexperienced, she was protected since she was young. Her only dream was to live under the sun. Now that Jiang Hai had helped her realize her dream, she was actually the same kind of person as Jiang Hai, except that she was a woman and Jiang Hai was a man. Apart from the weird thoughts of the people around Jiang Hai, ordinary career women would feel that Jiang Hai was very childish and boring when they looked at Jiang Hai. If you have the time, why don't you think about earning more money and improving your social status? Find something for yourself to do, help your subordinates, study and learn more about the manor, the ranch, and the fishing ground. There were probably many people with such career women around them. They were commonly known as strong women. They couldn't bear to see others like Jiang Hai, who was lazy and had nothing to do all day. In their opinion, there were actually a lot of things that Jiang Hai could do, but Jiang Hai didn't do it. Instead, he chose to stay there, which was very unbearable. What's there to pack? You told me to pack last time. If you lack anything, I'll buy it when we get there. Pulling the thick flesh on Whitehair's body, Jiang Hai picked up a herring that Edward Anderson caught and played with it. Herring was also called Pacific herring. Of course, this fish could also be found in the Atlantic Ocean, and there were quite a lot of them. Among the 4 major fishing grounds, the Peruvian fishing ground relied on this fish to make a fortune. Herring and cod were 2 of the most economic fish. However, now the population of cod was slowly declining with the closure of the Newfoundland fishing ground in Canada. Herring, on the other hand, was actually the most popular type of fish. This type of fish had a very disgusting way of eating it. After it was fished out, it would be immediately sealed in a can. When it was time to eat it, the taste, oh my god, compared to Huaxia's stinky tofu, it was like the difference between a small hill and the Himalayas. It was ranked second in the world's smelliest food. Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't eat it like that. What a joke, he wasn't crazy yet. After these herrings were caught, Edward Anderson and the others would use them as bait, because this fish would eat almost any fish. They were between 18 centimeters and 40 centimeters in size. When they were cooked, they tasted very good when fried. Especially now the herrings were seeded. They were fried with beer, and the taste was quite good. Of course, these things could be eaten and caught on the spot. The fish with the largest number in the world was not a joke. So Jiang Hai fed the excess to Whitehair. and white hair had no resistance to this food. Buy, you only know how to buy. You are very rich. Well, you are very rich. Look at how wasteful you are. Sooner or later, you will starve to death and have to beg for food. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice snorted at Jiang Hai, then continued. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai just smiled but didn't refute her. Perhaps in the eyes of others, she was very annoying, but in fact in Jiang Hai's heart, he was quite eager for someone to nag him like this, because it would remind him of his family. If Jiang Hai had any dreams and wishes, the most important would be to raise his children, but not have his parents. Although Bernice was much younger than him, her nagging made him feel like a family member. So Jiang Hai didn't have any dissatisfaction with Bernice. Instead, he was very affectionate with her nagging. Perhaps Bernice also knew that what she said had no effect on Jiang Hai, so after talking for a while, she sat back down next to Jiang Hai and played with white hair. Looking at Bernice's pretty face, Jiang Hai also smiled. This girl was really interesting. If possible, he hoped that this girl could stay here forever. But the relationship between him and her, Jiang Hai wasn't too good to say, because it was indeed not so easy to establish. Just as Jiang Hai was looking at Bernice playing with white hair, her phone suddenly rang. The screen of the phone lit up, and a word was written on it. Seeing this, Bernice also stood up and took her phone to the side. Jiang Hai didn't move and just looked at her. This was because Jiang Hai really didn't know. Bernice and Xiaoya never talked about their family's situation. Because they didn't go out together, Jiang Hai didn't even know their real names. It was just that Xiaoya called her Bernice for a long time, so they were very familiar with it. Now it seemed that Bernice had an elder sister, but why didn't she talk about her family's situation? Since she didn't say, Jiang Hai didn't ask. He just watched her walk away. He vaguely heard that she seemed to be speaking Mandarin, and there were words like the Mid-Autumn Festival. It seemed that her elder sister asked her if she was going back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. But Jiang Hai remembered that he also asked her if she would go back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Sure enough, it didn't take long for her to come back. She asked if you were going back for the festival. Seeing her coming over, Jiang Hai couldn't help but ask curiously. I said that I won't go back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Let's talk about it during the new year. What kind of drug did you give this little guy? It actually recognized the name white hair. It's really unpleasant to hear. When she heard Jiang Hai's question, Bernice instantly changed the topic and pointed to white hair in front of her. It was obvious that she was also very dissatisfied with the name white hair. Oh, how nice. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai wouldn't tell her about the news of spiritual energy. But at this moment Jiang Hai's phone also rang. He picked it up and saw that the caller turned out to be Qili. After thinking about it, maybe Qili also saw that the Mid-Autumn Festival was coming, so she called. Chapter 565. Ever since they fought side by side, the relationship between Jiang Hai and Qili was no longer the same as before. When they met, they didn't have a good impression of each other. For Jiang Hai, there was only disgust. After all, the relationship between the two was not so harmonious. As a man from the 3 provinces in the northeast, he was obviously a male chauvinist. He was ignored by his wife at home for a whole year. It would be strange if he felt comfortable. Moreover, he was despised by the people around her every now and then. So after Jiang Hai had the ability, he was indeed like a villain and directly turned hostile. Of course, if Qili didn't seem to be so arrogant to him, he wouldn't have such a big opinion of her. But this kind of relationship, after Qili admitted defeat and talked to him in the manner, had become a lot weaker. Plus, last time, they fought side by side, so the relationship between Jiang Hai and Qili improved a little. Jiang Hai didn't know what Qili was thinking now, but in Jiang Hai's heart, the hatred for Qili had been completely put down, but there was still no love. So the relationship between the two now was a bit like childhood friends, but it was also a little awkward. Looking at the phone call from Qili, Bernice's eyes flashed, then she didn't say anything. She just turned her head and continued to feed white hair. And Jiang Hai stood up and walked to the side to pick up the phone. Hello Qili, what's the matter? After picking up the phone, Jiang Hai asked Qili on the other side of the phone. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili hesitated for a moment, then said to Jiang Hai, "Hello Jiang Hai, it's nothing serious. The restaurant is running well. But, just now my mom called me and asked if we will go back for the Mid-Autumn Festival." Hearing Qili's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little speechless. This address, doesn't seem to be appropriate. I might not have time during the Mid-Autumn Festival, but I should be back in Bing City in November. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai decided to say it. Everything had to be done first, and Ai Xiaoxi called him first. So now, Jiang Hai really didn't want to go back to Bing City during the Mid-Autumn Festival. But it didn't matter. On November? Okay. Can you tell me why you want to go back to Bing City in November? Hearing Jiang Hai say that he won't be going back during the Mid-Autumn Festival, Qili was somewhat disappointed. But when she heard Jiang Hai say that he will be going back in November, she was happy again. Huang Yunfei will get married in November, and I will go back then. Hearing Qili's words, Jiang Hai also said, "Oh, if that's the case, I'll see you then. I'll free up some time too." Seeing that Jiang Hai is really going back in November, Qili also said quickly. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also smiled and responded. After chatting for a while, Jiang Hai hung up the phone. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai put away his mobile phone. If he is going to Ai Xiaoxi's house, and Qili's house this time, then he needs to prepare some gifts. Originally, if he is just going to Ai Xiaoxi's house, he can just buy the gifts after returning to China. But now, he is going to Qili's house, so he needs to take some gifts from the manor. This is not because he is looking down on Ai Xiaoxi's family, but because of the problem of vision. If he goes to Ai Xiaoxi's house, he can just take Wuliangya, Maotai health supplements, cigarettes and so on. After all, Ai Xiaoxi's family is not very rich, and Jiang Hai used to be a child of an ordinary family. It is already good enough for him to take these gifts for the first time. Even if Jiang Hai gives them beef and fish, they don't know how much these things are worth. When the festival comes, he will treat them to a meal and say that his son-in-law brought it back. In China, there are not many ordinary people who would think that delicious beef is worth much. At most they will say, "Your beef is real, and the taste is very authentic," and so on. Therefore, instead of taking things from the manor, it was far better to directly get some good cigarettes and good wine. When the relatives came over, the top-grade Maotai and Wuliangya would be placed on the table. It was much better than beef and other things. However, if he goes to Qili's house, he can't bring these things. Qili's house doesn't lack these things. It is more of a token of appreciation, so it is necessary to bring some beef and so on. What are you going to do? Seeing that Jiang Hai put away his mobile phone and was about to walk to the villa, Bernice, who was feeding White Hair, couldn't help but raise her head and ask Jiang Hai strangely. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also responded quickly, "I'm going to pack my things. This time, there is one more place to go." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice curled her lips, but she didn't say anything. She just continued to sit here and feed White Hair. But it can be seen that her eyes have been flashing, indicating that her heart is not as calm as she looks on the surface. But at this time, Jiang Hai didn't notice this. In fact, he was not a person who would pay attention to these things. After returning to the manor, he casually put away some of his undergarments and a set of outerwear. After getting off the plane, he always needs to change into a set of clothes. Jiang Hai's clothes are still the same as before. As for sportswear and outdoor wear, he naturally dislikes suits and the like. Wearing such things was pretentious and rigid. No matter what others say, he really doesn't like it. Now he has the final say in what he wants to wear, and what he wants to wear. So if he doesn't want to wear these things, no one can control him. Even if his clothes are untidy, it's up to the person. Those people in high-end places will recognize his watch and his glasses. These are more convincing than a suit. Of course, if he meets someone who doesn't know anything, then it's a different story. After packing his clothes, Jiang Hai went to the warehouse downstairs. He thought for a while and chilled a lobster, a dozen pounds of the best beef, and some dried sea cucumbers and abalones. Then he called the courier company. It's impossible for him to bring these things over from the United States. If he brings them to Ai Xiaoxi, he will be too embarrassed to take them away. So he is going to send these things to Bing City and let Fu Yuan or Su Weixian keep them for him. He will go to AI Xiaoxi's place and bring these things on the plane himself. It's said that the United States has the most inhumane and strict security, but in fact they also need to see who they are checking. After packing the things, the courier company in the United States also sent someone over. Although the courier services in the United States and Europe were more popular than the courier services in China, the speed of courier services in the United States and Europe was very slow. Basically, no matter what you buy online, it will take more than 10 days to get it delivered. But in China, it takes less than 4 days. When the online reviews are done, the courier service will be given a bad review. Even the slowest courier service in China will only take about 4 days, if it's not during the Lunar New Year. Some courier services are sent in one day and can be received the next day. These are unimaginable in the United States. Actually, this is mainly because of the salaries. In the United States, courier services are also charged by the bill. But the Americans are not like the Chinese who work hard to earn money. To them, this job is too tiring. That's why they are not willing to do it. It's sad. There are many jobs in the United States that the Americans are not willing to do. For example, food delivery, cleaning, or being a security guard in some places. These jobs earn a lot of money. Although it's not enough for some people, there are still many people doing these jobs in China. But in the United States, more than 95% of Caucasians will not do these jobs. More than 80% of African Americans will not do these jobs. On one side, there are lots of vacancies, and on the other side, there are people who are complaining about being unemployed. These people are really spoiled. In the United States, it takes about 10 days to deliver the goods. Even if there are no illegal items or items that need to be inspected, it will take at least 12 to 13 days to deliver the goods. If this is the case, these goods will arrive around the time Fengyu returns to Bing City. This is also because Fengyu had paid the courier company to speed up the delivery. If not, it will take at least half a month to deliver the goods. After sending the goods, Jiang Hai starts to laze around. He lies on the white jade bed and basks in the sun. Jiang Hai felt that every hour or so, a piece of dragon scale would grow on his body. This wonderful feeling really made Jiang Hai addicted. Unknowingly, Bernice also came back from outside. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, she couldn't help but shake her head. Jiang Hai's character is destined to be like this for the rest of his life. It will be difficult for him to change. But fortunately, her nagging was just for show. Just like how Jiang Hai ignored her nagging, she didn't think that Jiang Hai would change for the better, just because she nagged a few times. That was simply impossible. In fact, she felt that Jiang Hai was pretty good even if he maintained his current state. Just like this, Jiang Hai's leisurely time passed by for a few more days. Unknowingly, it is already September 24th. The 27th is the official day of the Mid-Autumn Festival. But starting from the 26th, the Chinese government has already started to go on holiday. In other words, Jiang Hai has to go back before the 25th. Otherwise, it will be troublesome if this wave of people catches up. Although AI Xiaoxi has already booked the high-speed train ticket, after getting the exact information from Jiang Hai, she still needs to calculate the time. On the morning of the 23rd, Jiang Hai handed the manor to Eduard Anderson and Robbins Garcia. Then, he bid farewell to Delina, Marion, Little Ye Bernice, and Aphrodite and drove his battle shield to New York. Only New York has a direct flight to the imperial capital. Boston is not available. At the same time, when Jiang Hai leaves town, he noticed that there seems to be more and more Chinese tourists coming to Winthrop recently. Chapter 566. Recently, Winthrop was indeed very popular, very popular, very popular. Since August, Winthrop began to attract its first batch of customers. Now, on September 23rd, the number of customers had exceeded 3,000. In less than 2 months, there were already 3,000 people. This was only talking about tourists from Huaxia. There were about 1,000 tourists from the United States, but this already made the people of Winthrop quite happy. Now a new peak was ushered in. With the arrival of the double festival, some units directly moved from the 26th to the 7th of October, nearly half a month of rest. Traveling abroad was the best choice, because in China, it was basically not to look at the scenery, but to look at the people. Some popular places abroad were also crowded, but coming to Winthrop was quite good. When Jiang Hai left, according to the news that Mrs. Turner told Jiang Hai when she came back, all the villas had been booked. The occupancy rate of the town's hotels had also reached 90%. It could be said that such a scene was something that Mayor Wallace had never dreamed of before. Jiang Hai was also quite happy about this. After all, he could also make money. However, some people came out to play during the festival, while some took advantage of the festival to go back to China. Just like today, when Jiang Hai just came out of Winthrop, a bus came out of Winthrop together with him. After seeing Jiang Hai's car, many people on the bus greeted Jiang Hai. After all, Jiang Hai was the pride of this town. Although Jiang Hai did not know them, they all knew Jiang Hai. He was a rich man who made a fortune by raising cattle. He had a car worth 20 million yuan, a more valuable yacht, and even a plane. The lobsters, abalones, and sea cucumbers he raised were the favorite of all the tourists here. Not only were they big, but they also tasted particularly good. After getting used to eating Jiang Hai's seafood, they really felt that the seafood in China was tasteless. The quality was indeed not one grade lower. Seeing them waving at him, Jiang Hai also waved his hand, then stepped on the gas pedal and headed to New York. His flight was at 1 p.m., and he left early this morning. First, he was afraid of being late. Second, he went back and wanted to buy some things for Feng Yunshun and Ai Xiaoxi. As for Chili, Jiang Hai thought for a while, and it was better to buy some things. After arriving in New York, Jiang Hai went directly to Fifth Avenue. He did not know other places. After arriving here, he simply looked around and entered the largest jewelry store here called Tiffany, the world's 3 recognized jewelry brands. One was French brand Cartier, which was known to many people. The second was Italian brand Bulgari, and the third was American brand Tiffany, not Tiffany. Because this was a local brand, it had a lot of discounts in terms of price and tariff. Although Jiang Hai had not bought jewelry, he at least knew that there was a discount when buying things from local brands in the United States. For example, buying a car. Japanese cars were indeed more fuel efficient, but in terms of price, they might not be able to compete with American brands such as Ford and Chevrolet. This was the local brand protection policy. After Jiang Hai entered the store, the melodramatic scene did not happen. After looking around, Jiang Hai chose 3 necklaces. One of them was particularly shiny and was made of tourmaline inlaid with diamonds. The other one was very luxurious and was made of platinum inlaid with diamonds. The last one was made of platinum, but it was much thicker and had many small diamonds on it. Jiang Hai really did not know how to choose these. He could only choose the ones with similar prices. The price of each of these 3 necklaces was about $100,000. Chili, Ai Xiaoxi, and Feng Yunshun each had a necklace. After wrapping it, Jiang Hai also threw it into his backpack, and then made some marks on it to prevent himself from making mistakes. After everything was done, he went to the airport. Because he was a Black Gold Card member of American Express, and he booked the top first-class cabin. No matter if it was to change his boarding pass or to get on the plane, he had a special channel. Soon, he passed the customs and entered the cabin. After putting the backpack away, Jiang Hai adjusted his huge seat back and casually chose a movie to watch. "Hey, you are Jiang Hai? Are you also going back to China?" Just as Jiang Hai was choosing a movie here, a surprised voice suddenly spoke to Jiang Hai. Hearing this voice, Jiang Hai looked back and found that a Huaxia man appeared next to him. He didn't know when he appeared next to him. He looked young and was a little fatty. At this time, he was talking to Jiang Hai excitedly. "You are." However, although he accurately called out his name, Jiang Hai really didn't seem to have an impression of him. "Hey, you don't know me yet. My name is Hao Fei. I just finished playing in Winthrop and am going back to China." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person here said with a smile. Hearing his introduction, Jiang Hai also understood that this person should be a tourist. It's understandable that he knows me, although he usually doesn't talk about himself in the town. There have always been legends about him in the town. After all, the town's current development is inseparable from the support of Jiang Hai. The development of the town was paid by Jiang Hai. The tourists of the town were brought back by Jiang Hai. It's impossible to say that he is not grateful to Jiang Hai. How is it? Winthrop is not bad, right? Hearing this person's words, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. It's not just not bad. It's great. To be honest, my family has a little bit of money. My father opened a company, so I have been traveling all over the world since I was a child. Besides the humanities, to be honest, Winthrop is definitely the best tourist destination in my opinion. The seafood is cheap, the people are kind, the living conditions are good, the air is good, the environment is good, everything is great. When I came here, I prepared 100,000 yuan to play. But after arriving here, I realized that I didn't need 100,000 yuan at all, only 30,000 yuan. So I directly upgraded to the first class and prepared to go back. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person named Hao Fei said excitedly. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai also smiled. Such rich tourists are their favorite. Hey, speaking of which, I'm going back after playing for a few days. I'm really a little reluctant. It's not that I'm reluctant to leave other things, but I'm reluctant to leave your lobsters. I say, brother, when are you going to sell lobsters to Huaxia? You're torturing me. As he spoke, Hao Fei sighed and then looked at Jiang Hai with a sad face, as if the Jiang Hai in front of him had become a lobster. I've farmed some lobsters, but it's still a little difficult to sell them back in China. In addition to lobsters, I also have longzhu, grouper, salmon, and our country's tasty large yellow croaker and Yangtze River swordfish, but they haven't been farmed yet. They can only be eaten next year. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai smiled. Not to mention that the seafood he farmed was not particularly large. If they were to be sold in China, it was estimated that they would only be sold in the 4 restaurants dedicated to Chile. Moreover, these things were so attractive that he was reluctant to sell them easily. Naturally, they would be sold to the highest bidder. Holy sh*t, there are so many delicious foods. Oh my God, you are so hateful. Now that you mention it, I feel like I'm about to drool. Hao Fei wiped off his non-existent saliva and said with a look of yearning. To be honest, there aren't many wild yellow croakers now. They're sold for 1,000 yuan per kilogram in China. The Yangtze River swordfish is even more expensive. But I didn't expect you to have all of them here. You're really hateful. When I left, I just finished eating the remaining lobsters in your manor yesterday. Now I'm hungry again. Stewardess, when can we eat? Hao Fei sighed helplessly. He looked at Jiang Hai with his small eyes, which made Jiang Hai feel a little scared. After talking for a while, he shouted to the stewardess. When the stewardess heard his words, she also walked over with a puzzled expression and told him that the plane had not taken off yet. They would talk about it after it took off. For this, Hao Fei, this fatty, had no other choice but to be depressed. Okay, since you support me so much, when you come next time, I'll invite you to my manor to play for a day. You can eat as much as you want. Looking at the fatty's miserable look, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Really? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Hao Fei instantly felt better. He looked at Jiang Hai with excitement and asked seriously. It's more real than a pearl, but you have to do it when I'm at home. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled and said to him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Hao Fei immediately nodded. As a foodie, you can tell from his body shape. His obsession with eating was still quite strong. He knew that Jiang Hai had so much delicious food, but he couldn't eat it. This was killing him. Now with Jiang Hai's invitation for him, this was an out-and-out hope. Then when will you be at home? Hao Fei's eyes stared at Jiang Hai and said with a face full of desire. I'm going back to China now. I'll be back in mid-October. I'll also be back during the Chinese New Year. I won't be there at that time, and the fish will be out around March next year. I'll be there at that time. If you want to come to Winthrop again, I think it'll be around March or April. Jiang Hai thought for a while and said to Hao Fei, Boston's winter was still very cold. Most people didn't like to go to the snow during winter. It was just like Ice City. During summer, there was nothing to do in Ice City, but many people came to Ice City. This was because it was cooler in summer, and people could come to Ice City to avoid the heat. During winter, there were many things to do in Ice City, but not many people came because it was too cold. It was the same for Winthrop. It was beautiful in winter, but it was too cold. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, there should be about 1,000 tourists in one winter. Chapter 567. When the plane appeared over the Imperial Capital Airport, Jiang Hai was gently woken up from his sleep by the stewardess who walked past him. Someone had stuffed a note beside him. Jiang Hai had always been slow to react to such things, so he didn't care about these things. Along the way, Jiang Hai's time passed quite quickly. This Hao Fei was a chatterbox who kept talking to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai wasn't bored. Anyway, they were just bragging together. Jiang Hai wasn't very disgusted with such a person. Later, the two fell asleep in their respective chairs. When they woke up, they had already arrived at their destination. After adjusting the seats, the plane slowly descended, followed by the sound of friction between the tires and the ground. The plane also gradually braked and stopped on the road of the Imperial Capital Airport. As the plane landed, all the passengers unfastened their seat belts almost at the same time and began to prepare to pack their things, even if the plane didn't stop properly. This might be a characteristic of the people. Most people's pace of life was very fast, and most things like to be crowded. For example, squeezing in the bus, squeezing in the subway. Even when boarding the plane, it was still crowded to get off the plane. They were afraid of going out later than others. This kind of thing was hard for Jiang Hai to understand. He usually hardly brought anything on the plane, so he didn't need a place to put his luggage. He was just so slow. When the people in the first-class cabin were almost gone, Jiang Hai stood up, picked up his luggage, and left the plane. When walking out of the departure hall, Jiang Hai had already seen Feng Yinshan and Ai Xiaoxi from afar. "Hey Jiang Hai." When Jiang Hai saw them, they also saw Jiang Hai. Feng Yinshan directly raised her arms and waved, and Jiang Hai also smiled and waved his hand. He tightened his backpack and walked in front of the two. When Jiang Hai came in front of the two had already plunged into Jiang Hai's arms. Seeing this scene, the hearts of many men in the waiting room were shattered into pieces. One had to know that when Feng Yinshan and Ai Xiaoxi stood here, they instantly captured the hearts of many men. The two women were tall, sweet, and dressed fashionably. It could be said that they were the limit of the beauties that could be seen on the streets. She had an angelic face and a devilish figure. To be honest, her gaze was especially seductive. Those single men would subconsciously glance at them, regardless of whether they had a partner or not. Many people were fantasizing about them, but unfortunately, the two women were just talking to themselves. They didn't look at others, nor did they have any intention of getting to know others. But even if they were just standing there, it was still a beautiful scenery. Now that they saw the two of them jumping into the arms of the same man at the same time, the atmosphere in the departure hall instantly turned sour. "You must be tired. Let's go." Perhaps she was aware of everyone's gaze. Ai Xiaoxi's face was still thin. She raised her head first, looked at Jiang Hai with her little red face, and quietly said to Jiang Hai, "Okay, let's go." Patting Feng Yinshan, who was still leaning on him, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai say that they were leaving, Feng Yinshan also raised her head, but she still refused to leave Jiang Hai's side. Instead, she continued to hold on to Jiang Hai and followed Jiang Hai to the parking lot. Today, in order to pick up Jiang Hai, Feng Yinshan didn't drive her own small sports car. Instead, she deliberately borrowed an Audi A4 from her colleague. Although this car looked very domineering with 4 queues, Jiang Hai would feel a little aggrieved sitting in this car. But there was no other way. After nestling in the car, Feng Yinshan also started the engine and headed in the direction of their home. On the way, Feng Yinshan and Ai Xiaoxi had been talking to Jiang Hai. For them, no matter what Jiang Hai's position was in their hearts, Jiang Hai was the most important. At least, Jiang Hai was the one with the largest proportion. So no matter what they wanted to say, they were willing to talk to Jiang Hai. They talked and laughed all the way. When Jiang Hai reacted, Feng Yinshan had already driven the car into their home. After the car was parked, the three of them went directly to the house Feng Yinshan bought here. This was a 2-bedroom, 1 living room in the 3rd ring road of the imperial capital. Usually, Feng Yinshan and Ai Xiaoxi lived in their own rooms, but today the rhythm was obviously different. After the 3 of them entered the house, Feng Yinshan didn't say anything. She first wrapped her arms around Jiang Hai's neck and opened her mouth to bite him. "Hey, you're too eager." Feeling Feng Yinshan's movements, Jiang Hai first kissed her for more than a minute before letting go. He patted Feng Yinshan's, but with a smile, and said helplessly, "You had a good time in the United States. You don't know how we spent the past 2 months. We had to keep our chastity for you and suppress our needs. Now that you're back, if you don't feed me, you can't leave again." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Feng Yinshan's eyes narrowed and said with a charming face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai, who was still a little tired because of the flight, instantly drove his tiredness aside. He looked at Ai Xiaoxi, who was a little confused, and in her exclamation, he picked up the 2 girls and walked into the nearest room. What happened next didn't need to be described in detail. Of course, the imperial court didn't allow it to be described in too much detail. In the blink of an eye, when Jiang Hai came to Feng Yinshan's house, it was only about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. When the battle was over, it was already early evening. Feng Yinshan and Ai Xiaoxi were lying lazily in Jiang Hai's arms, one on the left and one on the right. The intoxicated expression on their faces hadn't completely faded, and they looked at Jiang Hai with such infatuation. Although Jiang Hai has a lot of problems, has a lot of lovers, is not a firm person, sometimes occasionally makes mistakes, and does things a little melodramatic, but there are 2 things about him that are really likable. One is his character. Of course, character needs to be supplemented by money. The second is his combat power in this area, which really makes Feng Yinshan and Ai Xiaoxi unable to stop themselves. "You bad guy, you're getting worse and worse. Say, did you practice this thing every day when you were in the United States? Otherwise, how could it be possible for you to become bad again in just 2 months?" After patting Jiang Hai, Feng Yinshan finally managed to catch her breath. "Hee okay, I'm a little hungry. I haven't eaten yet. Quickly think about what you want to eat." Hearing Feng Yinshan's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. There are 2 main reasons why he has become worse. One is because the Dragon Balls have been upgraded again, and the second is because, what Feng Yinshan said is also true. But Jiang Hai can't say this. No matter how stupid he is, he can't hug a girl and talk about his romantic history. How stupid is he? So Jiang Hai wisely chose to change the topic. Feng Yinshan glanced at Jiang Hai, patted Jiang Hai's shoulder, and then slowly sat up and began to tie her hair, probably because she came out earlier. Feng Yinshan was actually very independent. In the past, when she lived by herself, she could clean up, cook, and cook by herself. So now that she was sharing a room with Ai Xiaoxi, it was probably to take care of her sister. Usually, when they were at home, she would cook. If they went shopping, the 2 of them would buy it together. Ai Xiaoxi would wash the dishes and the like. The 2 of them would also clean up the house together. It could be said that they had a good discussion. After all, Ai Xiaoxi also came from a poor family. Although she can't cook, it's not like she can't do anything. The 2 of them get along quite well. In front of Jiang Hai, Feng Yinshan tied up her hair, and then directly picked up the short-sleeved t-shirt that Jiang Hai was wearing and put it on her body. A woman wearing a man's shirt and t-shirt will always show a special charm. At this time, Feng Yinshan was the same. After wearing it, the 2 points on the top of the moon, and the faintly discernible front and back below, plus the 2 slender and straight thighs really made Jiang Hai have an impulse again. "Xiaoxi, deal with him, I'm going to cook." Seeing Jiang Hai's dishonest look, Feng Yinshan wrinkled her nose at Jiang Hai, then stretched out her hand to hit Jiang Hai's lower abdomen, and then turned around and left the room. As for Ai Xiaoxi, she also got up at this time and lay on Jiang Hai's side. Seeing that she really wanted to move, Jiang Hai immediately stopped her. No, I just did it. If you do it again, I will be weak. Let me rest, don't worry about it." Pulling Ai Xiaoxi up and letting her lie on his chest again, Jiang Hai said to her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi was like a kitten, lying on Jiang Hai's chest. To be honest, she enjoyed the time alone with Jiang Hai. Thank you very much for coming back. About a few minutes later, Ai Xiaoxi whispered to Jiang Hai's chest. Between us, there's no need to say thank you. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai went up and slapped her butt, then said with a smile. His relationship with Ai Xiaoxi is not one of saying thank you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, to be honest, Ai Xiaoxi was really moved. The balance in her heart, which was swaying left and right, also deviated a little towards Jiang Hai. Maybe it's not a bad thing to find such a man. Can you tell me about our plans for the next few days? I will be returning to Bing City in November. We don't have much time. Looking at Ai Xiaoxi, who was quiet in front of him, Jiang Hai slowly stroked her back and asked her, "Why are you going back to Bing City?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi raised her head and asked puzzledly, "I have a friend's birthday in November. If you are free, you can go together. Let's talk about our current plans." Looking at Ai Xiaoxi, Jiang Hai smiled and said to her, "Oh, okay." Hearing Jiang Hai's explanation, Ai Xiaoxi's face turned red. Originally, Jiang Hai was just casually saying it, but in Ai Xiaoxi's ears, it had a different meaning. Jiang Hai, is he going to introduce me to his friends? Chapter 568. Come and eat, don't get tired of it. You go to Ai Xiaoxi's hometown these few days. You have plenty of time to get tired of it here. Don't act in front of me. After a long time, Feng Yunshan returned to the room again. Looking at Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi still kissing each other, she couldn't help but feel a little jealous. She couldn't help but walk over and pat Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi's buttocks, and then said unhappily. Hearing her words, Ai Xiaoxi couldn't help but blush. She sat up with a smile, and began to put on her clothes. As for Jiang Hai, he was much more relaxed. After pulling Feng Yunshan over and kissing her, he stood up with his pants on. Rolling her eyes at Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshan also walked out of the room. Not long after, Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi also walked out. At this time, on the table in the living room, 4 dishes and a soup have been placed. 4 dishes, 1 dish, 3 delicacies, 1 dish, Xiran beef, 1 dish fried shredded potatoes, 1 dish fried meat with green pepper, and a large bowl of seaweed and egg soup. Looking at these dishes in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel hungry. After washing his hands, he sat there. Without waiting for Feng Yunshan to serve him rice, he had already begun to eat. When Ai Xiaoxi came out and saw Jiang Hai eating, she was too embarrassed to sit down and eat directly. Instead, she went to help Feng Yunshan get the bowl. As Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi came out with the bowl of rice, Jiang Hai has also tasted these dishes. How is it? Is the taste good? Looking at Jiang Hai eating happily, Feng Yunshan couldn't help but ask. And the taste is quite good. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai said seriously, while giving a thumbs up. Damn, it's good to hear. Hearing Jiang Hai say this, Feng Yunshan couldn't help but roll her eyes at Jiang Hai, but she was still happy in her heart. To be honest, she was very happy that Jiang Hai would praise her cooking. The 3 of them sat in front of the table. There was no need for them to give way to each other. The relationship between the 3 of them was not so polite. She picked up her chopsticks and started eating. She had to admit that Feng Yunshan did have the qualifications to be a good wife and mother. This girl was strong. She knew how to do, and was willing to do housework. In addition, she and Jiang Hai knew each other very well. If she hadn't made a wrong choice, she would have been a strong contender for the position of female lead. But now, she was willing to be a nobody, and her choice was Ai Xiaoxi. Alright, this is for you. While the 3 of them were talking, they ate quickly. There was not much awkwardness between the 3 of them. Jiang Hai knew their recent life very well, and they also knew Jiang Hai's life very well, although they didn't live together. But they chatted and video chatted with Jiang Hai on WeChat almost every day. They were actually very clear about what Jiang Hai was doing every day. They knew that after Jiang Hai left Huaxia, he went to the Caribbean Sea and fished for tuna there. They also knew that Jiang Hai's manor bought beef again. Of course, the beef they were eating now was sent to them by Jiang Hai. After all, they were his women. After they said that they wanted to eat the beef in Jiang Hai's manor, Jiang Hai sent them a lot of beef. At least, it was enough for them to eat directly when they wanted to eat it. After talking and eating, Jiang Hai took out the 2 necklaces he bought from his backpack and handed them over. After taking the box in Jiang Hai's hand and opening it, the 2 women's eyes lit up instantly. Jiang Hai gave Ai Xiaoxi the necklace with the pearl seal as the base, and the diamond-inlaid necklace, because this necklace was the most dazzling. It was also the most suitable age for Ai Xiaoxi. Although she was now with Jiang Hai, she was still only 21 years old. The necklace for Feng Yinshan was the platinum diamond necklace, and the broken diamond necklace was prepared for Qi Li. Although they were all made of the same material, the style and workmanship were completely different. The latter was more mediocre, while the former was more dazzling. Women were like birds, they had no resistance to these sparkling things. After seeing these 2 necklaces, the 2 women did not ask for the price. They directly picked them up and admired them in their hands. Compared to Ai Xiaoxi, who was still hesitant, Feng Yinshan was much more generous. Her position was a mistress, so naturally, she had to have the awareness of being a mistress. She directly wore it on her neck and showed it to Jiang Hai. Does it look good? Looking at Jiang Hai in front of her with a satisfied look, Feng Yinshan said with a smile. Of course. Hearing Jiang Hai's affirmation, Feng Yinshan also smiled and touched it. Although their income in this line of work may not be ideal, after all, not everyone will sacrifice their body for money, but their vision will not have a problem. She recognized that this was the brand of Tiffany. This brand didn't have many luxury stores in the country. Most of them were Cartier or Swarovski and so on. Of course, this refers to the top jewelry brands. The average girl has a Cartier watch and wears a Swarovski pendant, which is enough to kill everything. The 2 brands, Bulgari and Tiffany, are indeed not well known in China. Except for some top socialites, the average girl does not know much about these 2 brands. But fortunately, Feng Yinshan was not an ordinary girl. She knew that this necklace must be expensive. She did not know how much it was worth in the United States. But in China, it was absolutely impossible to get it without more than 1 million. Although a man spending money for a woman does not show his absolute sincerity, this is also a measure of sincerity. A man is willing to spend money for a woman, but it does not mean that this man must love this woman. But if this man is very clear about everything with this woman, even if he wants to buy a bottle of water, it means that this man absolutely does not love this woman. Living together, frugality is relative, not deliberate. You still have a little conscience. Well, eat quickly and go to bed early after eating. You took a flight for more than 10 hours, and then tomorrow you will take the train for several hours. It is better to rest early. Seeing that Jiang Hai's answer satisfied her, Feng Yinshan also smiled and said, as for Ai Xiaoxi, she kept the necklace well. Although she has not been in this circle for a long time, she also knows that this necklace must be very valuable. With her character, it is estimated that it is difficult for her to wear such a necklace, but it is inevitable to keep it. And this time, she did not say thank you to Jiang Hai, because Jiang Hai said that there is no need to say these things between them. By the way, if we leave, what will you do? Are you going back to Bing City for the Mid-Autumn Festival? Looking at Feng Yinshan, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. To be honest, when he thought of leaving Feng Yinshan here alone, Jiang Hai felt a little apologetic. Me? I haven't thought about it yet. Should I stay here, or go back home to Bing City to accompany my dad and mom? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Feng Yinshan curled her lips and said with some uncertainty, she is indeed a little hesitant now. If you want to go back to Bing City, I will also go back to Bing City in November. Looking at Feng Yinshan in front of him, Jiang Hai thought for a while and said, it is good to let her go back to Bing City. Hearing that Jiang Hai is also going back to Bing City, Feng Yinshan also asked about it. After explaining that one of his buddies got married, Feng Yinshan thought for a while and decided that it is okay to go back to Bing City. So she immediately used her mobile phone to check the tickets for tomorrow. But unfortunately, the tickets for tomorrow were sold out. After all, there must be a lot of people who want to go back early, but there are still many tickets for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Just as she was wondering whether to buy a ticket back on the Mid-Autumn Festival, Jiang Hai had already bought a ticket for her. What a joke, who is Jiang Hai? Not to mention just a ticket. Even if he wants to charter a plane, he can afford it. After making a phone call, the person in charge of Huaxia at American Express directly got him a first-class ticket. After Feng Yunshan's ID number was reported, this ticket was Feng Yunshan's. This is the power of the black gold card. I didn't expect you to be so useful. Come, sister will reward you tonight. Xiaoxi, pack up your things and quickly go into the house. I can't hold on for long. Seeing that Jiang Hai solved her trouble so easily, Feng Yunshan couldn't help but chuckle. She had to admit that in her opinion, Jiang Hai was also an out-and-out high-quality boyfriend. But unfortunately, she didn't find Jiang Hai earlier. But now it seems that it is not too late. Feng Yunshan took Jiang Hai's hand directly and walked into the room with him. Ai Xiaoxi smiled and obediently cleaned up the table and entered the room again. It is probably impossible to rest early tonight. At noon the next day, Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshan, and Ai Xiaoxi simply packed up, and the three of them left the house together. Feng Yunshan went to the airport. Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi went to the Imperial Capital South Station. After the three of them agreed to meet in Bing City, they went their separate ways. Jiang Hai was still wearing the same outdoor attire. He was carrying a sports backpack with his charger, game console, a few pairs of underwear, and a set of sportswear. If there was anything he needed, he could just buy a new set at any time. Feng Yunshan brought a lot of things. In addition to a hip bag, she even brought a suitcase. Who the hell knew why this woman had to carry a suitcase everywhere she went? Was she moving? Jiang Hai also saw Feng Yunshan's suitcase. It was full of clothes and shoes. Jiang Hai didn't understand at all. It was just a few days. She didn't need to go to a fashion show. Why did she bring so many things? However, Jiang Hai could only help Ai Xiaoxi with her wishes. The two took a taxi and came to the Imperial Capital South Station while it was not rush hour. They changed their tickets and entered the station. Chapter 569. Here's our seat. After getting on the train, Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi quickly found their seats. After putting Ai Xiaoxi's luggage and his own backpack on the upper luggage rack, Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi sat in the seats. Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi bought business class seats for the train, which were wider and more comfortable than the average B-class seats. Trains were different from ordinary trains. Huaxia might not be ranked high in the world when it came to things like airplanes and cars, but Huaxia was the world's #1 train. Not only was it fast, but it was also of high quality. At present, most of the cooperation between some developing countries and Huaxia relied on high-speed trains as a stepping stone. Speaking of which, trains were much more convenient than other modes of transportation. Not only were they much faster than trains, but they could also connect to the internet on the train. Of course, if the speed was too fast, they could not connect to the internet. However, they could surf the internet and play with their mobile phones here. Inside the train, it was not as boring as going through the security check on an airplane. They could also enjoy the scenery outside. The seats were similar to those on an airplane. Second-class seats were similar to the general economy class. First-class seats were more comfortable than the general economy class. The business class seats were not worse than the general first-class seats. Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi were now sitting in business class seats. Everyone had their own seat, and they did not have to worry about others occupying their seats. Most importantly, the environment was much better than the train. It was not dirty and messy. Of course, the ticket price of this train was much more expensive than that of the train. For example, second-class seats from the capital to Jiang Hai's destination, Wei City in Lu Province, cost almost 400 yuan, more than 379 yuan. The business class seats directly cost more than 1,100 yuan. It was really not cheaper than the plane tickets. However, it was indeed more convenient to take this train. The journey was about 6 hours, and it was not particularly far. After getting on the train, Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi put their luggage on, then leaned on their seats and played with their mobile phones. Ai Xiaoxi also leaned on Jiang Hai's shoulder, looking at the reflection of the two on the phone screen. This should be the first time we've been alone together, and it's been so long. Looking at Jiang Hai's image on the phone screen, AI Xiaoxi whispered. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also thought about it. It seemed that he had more or less time alone with other people, except for AI Xiaoxi. Oh well, it wasn't completely absent, because on that night they were alone. However, that period of time clearly couldn't be counted in this period of time. After all, the two of them weren't chatting back then, nor were they like this. Yeah. Jiang Hai shook AI Xiaoxi's hand, thought for a moment and said to her, well, it feels like a dream. Jiang Hai and I are going back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Hee, I really didn't think about it before. AI Xiaoxi rubbed her head, found a comfortable position, and then said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't know what to say. He could only scratch his head helplessly, then looked outside with her. There were more people getting on the train today, but trains were different from planes. Planes would wait for people and urge them to get on the train, but trains would definitely depart when the time was up, especially for a bullet train like this one. Although there were many people in the carriage today, the bullet train gradually started moving when the time was up. It quickly moved along the track and sped into the distance. Looking at the scenery outside, Jiang Hai and AI Xiaoxi also chatted with each other. AI Xiaoxi was mainly talking, introducing her hometown to Jiang Hai. AI Xiaoxi's hometown was in Wei City, Lu Province, Huaxia. But it wasn't in the downtown area of Wei City, but in a place that was similar to an urban rural area. This place wasn't far from the beach, and it wasn't very far from the city. It was developed a few years ago, and now it was considered a rural tourist spot. Jiang Hai was going to AI Xiaoxi's hometown today. After the bullet train arrived at Wei City, they still had to take the bus, which took about 2 hours to arrive. According to this time, it would be after midnight by the time Jiang Hai and the others arrived at AI Xiaoxi's house. Therefore, in order to make it easier for them to get there, plus the fact that they still had to buy gifts in Wei City, they decided to stay in Wei City for the night and take the bus to Wei City the next day. Regarding this, AI Xiaoxi naturally listened to Jiang Hai. As the train sped along, Jiang Hai also had a general understanding of Wei City. Wei City was considered a tourist city in the north, but its reputation was not as big as Green City and Lian City. Usually, northerners would go to Lian City and Green City to play. The places in Wei City were, in general, not as good as Green City, even though the beach here was much better than Lian City, and the expenses here were also much lower than Lian City. However, the number of people who came here to play was much less than Lian City, because there weren't any famous attractions here. For those who knew history, Wei City was quite interesting. This was because this city bore the weight of China's lowest point of history during the Qing dynasty. The first Beiyang Navy in China's history originated from this city, and the famous Jiawu Naval War also happened here. After the Jiawu Naval War, one of the 7 sons who returned to the motherland after being taken away by the foreign powers also lived in Wei City. But if you came here to play, the only place to see was Lugong Island, and that was it. If you came here to eat seafood and take a bath, it was indeed a good place, and the prices were cheap. But if you came here to see history and culture, then you might have come to the wrong place. But other than that, Wei City was also a good place to shop. This was because Huaxia was the closest place to Japan and South Korea. That's why many Japanese and South Korean shops were opened here. They not only sold food, but they also sold a lot of products from Huaxia. Actually, these products were also from China, but they were labeled with Huaxia's brand. But even so, these products were much cheaper than other places. For example, fishing rods were much cheaper here than other places in China. The same carbon fishing rod was sold for 80 renminbi in Wei City, and it was accompanied by a full set of fishing rods, hooks, lines, etc. But the same fishing rod in Bing City would be sold for 150 renminbi, and in Sichuan, it would be sold for 270 renminbi. This was the difference. That's why it was not a bad idea to buy some fishing rods and bring them back. After all, AI Xiaoxi didn't have Jiang Hai's spirit. After talking with Jiang Hai for a while, and looking at the scenery outside, she felt sleepy. She fell asleep in a daze. Jiang Hai just let her lean on him, and sat there the whole time. 6 hours passed by quickly, As the sky darkened, the train slowly entered the train station in Wei City. When the train was about to enter the station, Jiang Hai shook Ai Xiaoxi gently to wake her up. He then took his luggage and alighted from the train. At the train station, he hailed a taxi and went straight to Wei City's two best hotels, Golden Bay Hotel. After alighting from the taxi, they booked a room for Jiang Hai and Feng Yinchen. This time, Jiang Hai did not bother about extravagance. It was just a normal room with a king-size bed. After entering the room, they left their luggage there and went for a buffet. After returning to the room, they took a shower. As they had been on the train for a few hours, Jiang Hai was fine. But Ai Xiaoxi was exhausted, and Jiang Hai did not continue to torture her. Instead, he hugged her and went to sleep. That night was probably the best sleep Xiaoxi had ever had in her life. That was because the man she loved was hugging her as he slept beside her. Besides, there was no other woman in the room other than her. The next morning, when the sun shone into the room, both of them woke up. Good morning. When Jiang Hai opened his eyes, Ai Xiaoxi was looking at him with her big eyes blinking. Good morning. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also chuckled. Although he and Aphrodite had already done some things that shouldn't have been done, this was the first time a woman said good morning to him when he woke up in the morning. This made Jiang Hai a little emotional. He hugged Ai Xiaoxi and Jiang Hai pulled her into his embrace. But when he hugged her, Ai Xiaoxi's face couldn't help but turn red. Because in the morning cough, all men understand. Do you want me to help you take care of it? Ai Xiaoxi whispered into Jiang Hai's ear as she felt the thing hugging her. Forget it. There are still a lot of things to do today. Let's get up. Even though he wanted to, he had to think about it. After all, he still had to visit his in-laws today. If he woke up in the morning and didn't make it in time, it would be troublesome. But while Jiang Hai was a little conflicted, Ai Xiaoxi wasn't too conflicted. When she heard Jiang Hai's words, she took the initiative to shrink her body. The fire of war in the morning was ignited just like that. In the blink of an eye, it was almost noon. After Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi checked out, they had a meal in this hotel. Then they went to the department store here. Since they were going to visit their in-laws, they had to give gifts. The Huaxia civilization had a long history. So many men came to a conclusion when they went to their in-laws' houses. The first time they went, they had to give gifts. And the gifts had to be carefully chosen. It wasn't cigarettes or alcohol. The standard was 2 bottles of alcohol that cost about 300 yuan, plus a pack of cigarettes that cost about 400 yuan. Zhonghua, Tianzi, Su cigarettes, or something of the same level, and something that cost about 1,000 yuan. This was the standard. If there was really a financial problem, a low-quality gift would be the same, around 600 yuan. For people like Jiang Hai who didn't lack money, naturally a high-quality gift would be the best. Ever since he became rich, the temperament of a nouveau riche was undoubtedly on display. Chapter 570. First, they ordered some alcohol Maotai Flying Heaven. 1 bottle cost more than 6,000 yuan. Next, they bought cigarettes Softbox Chunghua, also known as Big Chunghua. 10 cigarettes cost 10,000 yuan. After the cigarettes and alcohol were bought, they were for Ai Xiaoxi's father and mother. Next, they bought clothes. Jiang Hai didn't need to buy anything else for her relatives, because in Ai Xiaoxi's eyes, there was no need for her relatives to interact with them. During her family's most difficult times, those relatives avoided her family like the plague. Her mother went door to door to beg them, and put in a good word for them. In the end, for the sake of their relatives, these relatives couldn't be ignored and borrowed 300 to 500 yuan each. However, what was the use of such a small amount of money during her family's most difficult times? Whether it was her uncle's family, her aunt's family, or her uncle's family, they were all the same. Yes, it wasn't easy for them to earn money. You couldn't expect them to take the initiative to help you when you were in trouble. After all, their money didn't grow on trees. The money belonged to them. If they wanted to lend it, they could. If they didn't want to, it was fine. Everyone sweeps the snow in front of their own door. Don't ask others to add frost to their roof. This was a famous saying in Huaxia since ancient times. Therefore, Ai Xiaoxi also understood this point. However, she still remembered these people. She wasn't rich now, but Jiang Hai was. Even if Jiang Hai's money grew on trees, she didn't want Jiang Hai to spend it on these relatives. People always put themselves in other people's shoes. Jiang Hai wasn't a saint, and neither was Ai Xiaoxi. It was that simple. Therefore, Jiang Hai only bought gifts for Ai Xiaoxi's parents and her younger brother. He didn't buy anything else. Even so, there was still a large pile of gifts. Looking at these gifts, Ai Xiaoxi couldn't help but feel a little annoyed because these things weren't easy to take back. However, before she could finish her annoyance, a great wall Haver H9 stopped in front of them. This car is. Looking at the driver who got out of the car and confirmed Jiang Hai's identity, he took the initiative to hand over the keys. Ai Xiaoxi couldn't help but feel a little confused. What's going on? Did Jiang Hai buy a car in such a short time? Oh, I rented it. After all, I'm going to your house. It's more convenient to rent a car. Jiang Hai smiled when he heard Xiaoxi's words. Indeed, this car was rented by him. As Jiang Hai said, it was indeed inconvenient to go to Ai Xiaoxi's house without a car. Of course, Jiang Hai was not there to show off his wealth. If he was, he would not have rented this car. Although this car was considered not bad in the country, it should be considered one of the better ones among the domestic cars. After all, the fruit car cost 200,000 yuan. However, for Jiang Hai, who had been driving a Shield all year round, this car was really not that good. You're really wasting money. Although she said that, Ai Xiaoxi was quite happy that Jiang Hai rented a car. After putting everything in the car, Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi also got in the car. Following the direction she pointed, they went to her house. Although today was not the Mid-Autumn Festival, it was the first day of the legal holiday. There were a lot of people going out of the city to play. Even if Wei City was not a particularly big city, there were still some traffic jams on the highway out of the city. The car slowly moved forward. Unknowingly, several hours had passed. When they finished shopping, it was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It took less than 2 hours to travel by bus. Usually, it would only take about an hour by car. But when Jiang Hai stopped the car in front of Ai Xiaoxi's house, it was already 5 o'clock in the evening. As the car stopped in front of the small courtyard, many villagers who were outside at this time looked over. When they saw Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi get out of the car, they couldn't help but whisper in a low voice. The Ai family was quite famous in this small village. It was mainly because Ai Xiaoxi's father was a carpenter passed down from generation to generation. Nowadays, the village was not like the city. Although people would go to the store to buy furniture, sometimes they still liked the solid wood furniture. Therefore, the carpenters in the village were generally very popular. Of course, they were only popular now. If it was 40 or 50 years ago, carpenters would be a strong competitor for the village chief position. Ai Xiaoxi's mother was originally a famous flower in this area. Ai Xiaoxi was very smart and beautiful since she was young. When she was in junior high school, there were already many people who came to propose marriage. However, Ai Xiaoxi's mother rejected them all. She didn't want her daughter to be like the other village women who got married and had children in their teens. She didn't want her daughter to be tied up here for the rest of her life and not be able to go anywhere. Since Ai Xiaoxi could learn, she would let her learn well. Later, Ai Xiaoxi was indeed very impressive. She was admitted to a good university and went to the capital. However, in the first year of school, her father broke his leg. Her father just recovered, and her mother's leg got a tumor. It wasn't easy for her to make it to the second year of university. Her younger brother in high school was diagnosed with leukemia. Although his bone marrow was changed, he couldn't do any heavy work in the future. He couldn't go to school because of the delay. The whole family was a little confused for a while. Later, she heard from her friend that she went to Feng Yunshan's finance company to make money. After that, things were much simpler. She got to know Jiang Hai and got a sum of money to help her family get through the crisis. Now, because of the money she sent back, her family's life was quite good. It was definitely above average in the small village. It was precisely because of this that the people in the small village knew about Ai Xiaoxi's family. They also knew that Ai Xiaoxi had found a rich boyfriend outside. They didn't know if it was because they watched too many TV dramas. Perhaps some people were jealous. So gradually, the small village spread that Ai Xiaoxi found an old man. He was even older than her father, which brought a lot of pressure to the Ai family. However, now that Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi got out of the car and acted very close, these rumors were instantly shattered. Holding cigarettes, wine, and some other things, he took them out of the car and put them on the ground. Others could see it from afar. What era was it now? The farmers' eyes weren't very sharp. Although they didn't know about some luxury goods, they knew about these good things that they had come into contact with. Maotai Flying Heaven and Zhonghua cigarettes instantly made the eyes of several families closer to them turn red. Hey, Xiaoni from the Ai family is back. Come and see your parents. At that moment, a woman close to them couldn't help swaying her bucket-like waist. She walked over step by step and said to Ai Xiaoxi with a happy face, "Yes, Aunt Lu. I'm back to see my parents." Hearing this person's words, Ai Xiaoxi was very calm. She just nodded faintly and walked to the iron gate of the house. As she knocked hard on the door, the sound of dogs barking came from inside. Aunt Lu saw that Ai Xiaoxi didn't want to talk to her and couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. She glanced at Jiang Hai and found that Jiang Hai was just standing there looking at the scenery around. She couldn't help but twitch her mouth. In her heart, she thought that the Ai family was really heartless. They didn't recognize their neighbors when they had money. However, she didn't think about it. As neighbors, she had a lot of conflicts with the Ai family. Ai Xiaoxi was already giving her face by calling her Aunt Lu. The woman who was rejected swaggered past Jiang Hai and went far away. Who knew who she was gossiping with? At this moment, a young man's voice came from the gate of the Ai family. Who is it? Hearing the young man's voice, Ai Xiaoxi couldn't help but feel a little excited. Shall we? It's me. However, she still suppressed her excitement and shouted at the gate. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, the person inside quickened his pace and quickly came to the gate and opened it. Then, a boy's face that was 60% similar to Ai Xiaoxi's appeared at the gate. When he saw that it was Ai Xiaoxi, the excitement on his face became even more obvious. It was obvious that the relationship between the siblings was really good. Sis, it's really sis. Dad, Mom, sis is back. Seeing Ai Xiaoxi's delicate little face, the boy shouted loudly and ran into the house at the same time. However, before he could run back, the sound of footsteps came from the house. An old couple came out of the house. People in the countryside were not as good at maintaining their appearance as people in the city. According to Ai Xiaoxi, her parents were in their early 40s. When she was born, her mother was only 19 years old. However, the two of them now looked like they were in their 50s. Time had left traces on their faces. For comparison, Qi Li's mother was in her 50s this year. However, she looked like she was in her 40s. Ai Xiaoxi's mother was only 41 years old this year, but she looked like she was in her 50s. Ah, it's really you. You didn't even give us a call when you came back. Really? Are you the only one who came back? Where's your boyfriend? After coming out of the house and seeing that it was really her daughter, Qi Li's mother couldn't help but cry out excitedly. She quickly took a few more steps and came in front of Ai Xiaoxi. With a nervous face, she held her hand and asked loudly, "Mom, what are you talking about? Mom, let me introduce you. This is Jiang Hai, Jiang Hai. This is my mom, this is my dad, and this is my brother Ai Xiaoyi." Hearing her mother's words, Xiaoxi couldn't help but blush. She immediately pulled her mother's hand and shook it. Then she turned her head and made way for the family of three to notice Jiang Hai outside. She introduced him to the family. "Oh, Uncle, Auntie, shall we?" Chapter 571. Hello, hello. Don't stand outside, come in quickly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi's parents couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Ai Xiaoxi's mother wiped her hands on her apron. Then, she seemed to have thought of something, and immediately let Jiang Hai into the house. Ai Xiaoxi's father and brother took the initiative to help carry the things. Jiang Hai immediately said that it wasn't necessary. He first lifted the heaviest wine and put some things on top of it. Then, He walked into the small courtyard under AI Xiaoxi's guidance. AI Xiaoxi's father and brother carried the rest of the things in. Look, we came back to celebrate the festival and bought so many things. How extravagant. AI Xiaoxi's parents might not have smoked or drunk these Maotai and Chunghua cigarettes, but they knew that these things were very expensive. As soon as they moved in, AI Xiaoxi's mother whispered in a low voice, but it was obvious that she was very happy. It's okay, these don't cost much. It's mainly my goodwill. Hearing AI Xiaoxi's mother's words, Jiang Hai also hurriedly said. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, AI Xiaoxi's mother smiled until her eyes became slits. She had a good first impression of this son-in-law. Mothers-in-law always loved their son-in-law. Of course, the son-in-law must first satisfy her requirements. First, he must dote on her daughter. Second, he must have a certain financial foundation. If the girl liked him, it would be even better. In her opinion, this Jiang Hai was very good. In the beginning, she was really afraid that her daughter would be like what the people in the village said. If she found a man in his 70s or 80s, then they would be embarrassed. Now, it seemed that although Jiang Hai was older than her daughter, he should be no more than 30 years old. It was normal for men to be 5 or 6 years older than women. Older men would know how to dote on others, and it seemed that his financial foundation was quite good. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come here to buy so many good things. Moreover, AI Xiaoxi also said that the money in the house was given by him. Although he said that he borrowed it, he didn't intend to take it back. It was obvious that he didn't lack money. The young man didn't look like someone who would attract attention. He didn't look like the pretty boys that were popular nowadays. He looked very effeminate. He looked tall and strong. Although he wasn't wearing a suit and leather shoes, he was wearing a suit. However, he also looked very clean and capable, which made people feel comfortable looking at him. It could be said that AI Xiaoxi's mother was very satisfied with this first impression. As for Xiaoxi's father, he didn't have much to say. All the good cigarettes and wine were for him. On the other hand, AI Xiaoxi's younger brother was sizing up Jiang Hai curiously. He was quite curious about this brother-in-law, who had come to visit them. As for Jiang Hai, while dealing with AI Xiaoxi's mother, he was also looking around the small courtyard. This small courtyard wasn't considered small. It was about 400 to 500 square meters. In the small courtyard, there were 2 single-story houses arranged in an L shape. There was also a huge courtyard. In the corner of the courtyard, there was a small vegetable garden. It could be seen that the vegetables were picked from there. In the courtyard, there were also many tools used by carpenters. There were even some shavings on it now. It seemed that AI Xiaoxi's father was still doing something in the afternoon. AI Xiaoxi's house wasn't completely in the countryside. As mentioned earlier, it was considered an urban-rural area. However, the people here mainly made a living by farming. Of course, AI Xiaoxi's house didn't have much land. Her father was a carpenter, so he usually made a living by doing carpentry. In the nearby villages, her father's craftsmanship was indispensable for all the weddings and funerals. Her father's craftsmanship was indeed very strong. He could make all kinds of cabinets, beds, windows, and even beams. His craftsmanship was quite good. But now, when new houses were being built, they basically used reinforced concrete. For the time being, there was no need to use wood for beams. This place was very close to the sea. If wood was used, it would be very corrosive. Therefore, for many years, her father hadn't accepted such a business. Only last year, there was a house building a warehouse. The warehouse didn't need good materials, so he was prepared to buy wood to make a beam. When he went to the beam, he slipped and fell from the roof. Although he was fine, his leg was broken. This was the beginning of the AI family's nightmare. But now, although he was still somewhat affected when he walked, AI Xiaoxi's father could move freely. This was indeed a good thing for the AI family. He followed AI Xiaoxi's family into the room in the middle. The layout of AI Xiaoxi's house was somewhat similar to the layout of the city. Of course, one couldn't expect the houses in the countryside to be as clean as the houses in the city. But the floor was tiled. There was a big sofa in the living room. It seemed to be made by AI Xiaoxi's father, because although the style was a little old, it was unusually sturdy. There was a big old TV opposite the sofa. At this time, a certain program was playing on the screen, Run bar buddy. Jiang Hai looked over and saw that the whole house was bright and clean. After putting these things next to the kitchen table in the living room, Jiang Hai was pulled to the sofa by AI Xiaoxi's father. You guys go ahead and chat. Xiaoxi and I will cook. Shall we come and help? Seeing Jiang Hai sit down, AI Xiaoxi's mother couldn't help but smile. Then, she pulled AI Xiaoxi into the kitchen. As for AI Xiaohui, who had already sat down, he couldn't help but shake his head and stand up. Although he couldn't do any heavy work now, he still had to do some small things. Of course, AI Xiaoxi and AI Xiaohui also knew that AI Xiaoxi's mother was giving Jiang Hai and AI Xiaoxi's father some time alone. The son-in-law and the father-in-law have to talk after all. Some things need to be said by AI Xiaoxi's father. That's smoking. However, AI Xiaoxi's father was obviously not a person who was good at talking. After sitting for a while, he hesitated for a while, then took out his cigarette and said to Jiang Hai, "Thank you, uncle, I don't." Looking at the cigarette handed over, Jiang Hai gently pushed it away and said with a smile, "Don't smoke? Well, good, it's good not to smoke. It saves money and is good for the body." Hearing that Jiang Hai doesn't smoke, AI Xiaoxi's father nodded seriously. Not smoking is indeed a good habit. Then he took out a general and put it in his mouth. After taking a deep breath, AI Xiaoxi's father asked Jiang Hai, "That little Jiang, can I call you that?" Looking at Jiang Hai, AI Xiaoxi's father asked him with a smile. Of course, of course." Hearing AI Xiaoxi's father's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. He didn't mind being called that. "I heard from my daughter that you were born in the year of the dragon?" Seeing that Jiang Hai was easy to talk to, AI Xiaoxi's father continued, "Well, I was born in the year of the dragon, 8 years old." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also responded, "There is nothing to hide. It's good to be born in the year of the dragon. Long Wang. Haha. I heard from that last that you are from Bing City. But that last did not tell me where you are working. How are your parents at home?" Seeing that Jiang Hai answered, AI Xiaoxi's father continued to ask, "Well, I'm from Bing City. My parents have passed away a few years ago. Now, I'm the only one left in the family. As for work, my main workplace is in the United States. I have a manor there and raise some cows and fish." Hearing AI Xiaoxi's father's words, Jiang Hai also said truthfully, "Oh, in the United States? That's very far away." Hearing that Jiang Hai was in the United States, AI Xiaoxi's father couldn't help but frown. This made him a little uncertain. In his opinion, Jiang Hai was in the United States, and he wasn't working for others. He had a manor of his own. He wasn't sure how much money he could make by raising cows and fish in the United States. But thinking about it, although Jiang Hai's family situation was better than his, they shouldn't be particularly rich. Most importantly, Jiang Hai's business was in the United States. He didn't work for others, and he could come back when he worked. But he had started his own business there, and it wasn't easy for him to come back. This meant that if his daughter married Jiang Hai in the future, she would also have to settle down in the United States. At that time, the sky was high and the emperor was far away. If anything happened, they wouldn't know. As parents, especially after they got older, no one was willing to let their children be too far away from them. Although he still had a son at home, their daughter was going to be so far away. They didn't feel comfortable in their hearts. But as the saying goes, children and grandchildren have their own blessings. They couldn't care so much, as long as their daughter was willing to go. Well, it's on the other side of the world. But it's convenient now. It's only a dozen hours by plane. If you have time, uncle and auntie can come to my place. My place is pretty good." Hearing AI Xiaoxi's father's words, Jiang Hai touched his nose. He wasn't stupid, so he naturally understood. But his roots were there, and he couldn't be brazen about it. "Well, speaking of raising cows, don't look at me as someone who has never raised one before. There are many people in the surrounding villages who raise cows. Xiaoxi's second uncle's family raises cows. They raise a total of 5 cows. Each cow produces milk and can earn more than 10,000 yuan a year. The profits from these things are still very rich." Although he had some knowledge of Jiang Hai's work, how should he put it? He wasn't very satisfied. But since it was Jiang Hai's first time here, AI Xiaoxi's father couldn't say too much. So after pondering for a while, he took the initiative to change the topic. Well, yes, cows are quite profitable. In fact, it wasn't only domestic cows that were valuable. Naturally, overseas cows were also valuable. The so-called cows, the kind with black and white flowers, were called Dutch cows. This kind of cows could be found all over the world. Beef cattle might be divided into different grades, but generally speaking, cows weren't too different. This was because they were basically Dutch cows. Although many cows were also used for meat, labor, and milk, or both, their milk was indeed a little inferior compared to Dutch cows. Chapter 572. Then what kind of cattle do you raise? Hearing that Jiang Hai also knew about cows, AI Xiaoxi's father couldn't help but ask eagerly. Oh, I raise beef cattle. I also have a few cows, but they only provide milk to the people in my manor. They don't sell milk. Hearing her father's words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, and said to AI Xiaoxi's father, beef cattle? That's also worth some money, right? How many do you raise? In China, the price of beef cattle was far lower than that of cows. An adult cow could be sold for 30,000 to 50,000 renminbi, while a calf was only worth 5,000 to 8,000 renminbi. There was no other way. The meat from beef cattle sold in China couldn't be sold at a high price. For example, the top beef cattle in Huaxia, known as the best breed of beef cattle in Huaxia, Lucy Yellow cattle, was listed in the National Livestock and Poultry Genetic Resources list of key protected breeds. An adult bull could grow up to 700 kilograms. The slaughter rate was 50%, which meant that after killing it, one could get 350 kilograms of beef, which was 700 kilograms. According to the average wholesale price of beef of 20 renminbi, 30 renminbi in the market or supermarket, the price of an adult Lucy Yellow cattle was about 14,000 renminbi. This was after deducting the cost of the calf labor, grass and corn, slaughtering tax, etc. A beef cattle in Huaxia could only earn a few thousand RMB, which was really not much. Therefore, in the eyes of AI Xiaoxi's father, beef cattle were indeed far worse than cows. More than 20,000. Hearing her father's words, Jiang Hai didn't hide it, nor did he tell him how good his cattle were. If he said this, it would sound like he was bragging, so Jiang Hai decided to save it for later. Wow! Hearing Jiang Hai's words, AI Xiaoxi's father couldn't help but tremble. Although beef cattle weren't worth much in his heart, an adult beef cattle was worth at least 10,000 renminbi. More than 20,000 of them. That would be more than 200 million renminbi. In an instant, Jiang Hai, who in his eyes only had a little money, became a billionaire. From the looks of it, she didn't have to worry about her children's finances anymore. You're really young and promising. Feeding cows every day must be very tiring. Although money wasn't omnipotent in this world, it was impossible to do anything without money. After learning that Jiang Hai was financially strong, AI Xiaoxi's father was relieved. It's okay, because I hired some professional cowboys, so it's not bad. I'm mostly responsible for decision-making, such as selling cattle. Hearing AI Xiaoxi's father's words, Jiang Hai also briefly introduced his situation. Just like that, the two of them chatted for about half an hour. Then, AI Xiaoxi's mother called for them to eat. As AI Xiaoxi's younger brother, AI, shall we put down the table? Jiang Hai and AI Xiaoxi's father walked to the table and sat down. Then, the three of them began to serve the dishes one after another. Originally, they didn't prepare much delicious food today. After all, they didn't know that Jiang Hai would come today. Fortunately, tomorrow was the Mid-Autumn Festival. For the festival, they prepared a lot of food at home. They just had to cook now. In just a short while the dishes were all ready. When Northeasterners ate, they paid attention to the number of dishes. They wanted 2 dishes, not single. 6 dishes meant 6 smooth. 8 dishes meant good luck. 10 dishes meant 10 beautiful, and so on. In fact, this custom was passed down from Lu province. After all, during the previous dynasty, there weren't many people in the 3 northeastern provinces. Although it was the place where the Manchurian Qing dynasty made its fortune, there were still many people in the 3 northeastern provinces. But after obtaining the Central Plains, the Manchurian Qing dynasty, actually looked down on the areas outside the Great Wall. They thought that it was cold and not suitable for survival. It could be seen from the Treaty of Nerchinsk that the Manchurian Qing dynasty and the Russians signed that they didn't care much about the development of the northeast. The northernmost Heilong province in the northeast was the place where criminals were sent to in ancient times. This could be seen in many movies and TV series. There were often people who said that they were sent to Ninguda. These 3 words were actually not a place name, but a literal translation from Manchurian. In fact, it actually referred to the 3 northeastern provinces. At the beginning of the previous dynasty, there were very few people in the 3 northeastern provinces. Therefore, the government of the previous dynasty had organized a lot of people to go to Guangdong. Lu province was a big province with a large population, so there were quite a lot of people from Lu province. It was because of these people that many people in the 3 eastern provinces had their ancestral homes in Lu province. Lu province's customs had also spread to the 3 eastern provinces. It was the same for the number of dishes one had to eat. Although today was the first time Jiang Hai came, and the AI family didn't prepare anything, AI Xiaoxi's mother still prepared 8 dishes. A large plate of potato and pork ribs was stewed in a pressure cooker. Otherwise, it wouldn't be cooked so quickly. A plate of vinegar jellyfish skin, a plate of bean braised pork, a plate of braised Spanish mackerel, a plate of shrimp and spinach scrambled eggs, a plate of hot kohlrabi, a plate of spicy fried clams, and a large bowl of tofu ball soup. Looking at the full plate of food in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel hungry. Although Xiaoyu made delicious food for him every day when he was in the United States, he hadn't eaten such home-cooked food for a while. Creatures like humans were spoiled. In the past, Jiang Hai didn't even look carefully at what abalones, sea cucumbers, and lobsters looked like. Now, he was a little tired of eating them, and wanted to try the taste of these home-cooked dishes. Come, let's eat. Don't look at the food. Even if you look, it won't enter your stomach. Xiao Jiang, you don't have to be so polite here. Treat it as your own home. Looking at the food, Jiang Hai was really hungry. Seeing that Jiang Hai seemed to be interested in her dishes, AI Xiaoxi's mother was also very happy. As a cook, there was nothing happier than seeing someone like her cooking. After everyone sat down, AI Xiaoxi's mother started to instruct everyone to eat. AI Xiaoxi's brother went to the fridge and took out a few bottles of beer. People from Lu province also liked to drink beer. It was similar to the people in Bing City. The brand of beer was also Lu province's local brand, Green City. Jiang Hai had drunk this brand of beer in the past. The taste was not bad, and he could accept it. Jiang Hai opened the beer and poured it into a glass. After everyone drank a glass, Jiang Hai couldn't wait to pick up his chopsticks and eat a clam. Clams were actually a kind of shellfish. People who didn't live in the coastal areas or didn't eat seafood often didn't know much about this kind of food. However, people who often ate seafood wouldn't be unfamiliar with this kind of food. There were 3 kinds of clams. The biggest and most expensive was the yellow clam, followed by the flowery clam and the white clam. Compared to the yellow clam, the flowery clam and the white clam were much cheaper. They were sold in some restaurants in Lian City. Flower clams were sold at 1 renminbi per 500 grams. Of course, there was a limited supply. But even if one were to buy it, it would not cost more than 3 renminbi. Flower clams could also be found in the Atlantic Ocean. But Jiang Hai and the rest did not eat a lot of them. Now that he had eaten this clam, it tasted pretty good. The only problem was that it was slightly salty. Shandong cuisine was salty, and because AI Xiaoxi's family lived in the urban rural area, the people there would cook salty dishes. First, it was because the salty dishes could be stored for a long time, and they were not afraid of spoiling. Secondly, it was because they needed to work, so eating salty food would give them strength. As for health, in their opinion, it wasn't very important. Therefore, when Jiang Hai ate it, it was a bit too salty. Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, AI Xiaoxi couldn't help but smile. She was also a bit confused just now. She forgot to tell her mother to make the dishes a bit lighter. It seems that Jiang Hai couldn't stand it anymore. Come, have some soup. Seeing Jiang Hai's chopsticks slow down, AI Xiaoxi took the initiative to serve Jiang Hai a bowl of soup. Then, she smiled and said to Jiang Hai. After drinking a mouthful of soup, Jiang Hai looked at AI Xiaoxi and gave her a gratified look. At least the soup was not too salty. After eating a few mouthfuls of dishes to fill his stomach, Jiang Hai began to drink with AI Xiaoxi's father. He could not stand the dishes, but he could still drink the wine. AI Xiaoxi's father obviously had some good wine. Although they weren't drinking white wine, and it wasn't satisfying, drinking some wine with Jiang Hai was still very happy. For a while the atmosphere at the table was very good, but sometimes the atmosphere was too harmonious, and some people would come to make trouble, just like now. Brother, sister-in-law, I heard that Xiaoxi brought her boyfriend back? Just when the family was eating happily, a slightly sarcastic voice suddenly came from outside. Then 4 people came in from outside. The 4 people were 2 men and 2 women. Their age should be about the same as AI Xiaoxi's parents. When they walked into the courtyard, the leading woman shouted loudly. Hearing their voices, the big yellow dog that had been lying in the courtyard couldn't help but pricked up its ears and barked at them. However, these people had obviously ignored the big yellow dog and walked straight towards them. The dogs in the countryside were divided into 2 types. One was called a dog, and the other was a watchdog. Called dogs were like the one in AI Xiaoxi's house. They could bark loudly, but their fighting power was very weak. Sometimes they could not even defeat a mouse. Its only function was to call out loudly when an outsider entered the house to inform the owner or the neighbors. The other type of dog was a watchdog. This type of dog was very fierce. It would bite people if they did not call out to them. However, it was rare to have this type of dog. It was obviously not the first time these 4 people came to AI Xiaoxi's house. They ignored the big dog and walked straight into the room. When they saw AI Xiaoxi's family and Jiang Hai sitting there, their eyes revealed a trace of disdain. Chapter 573. Hey, big brother. This is the first time Xiaoxi's boyfriend came to our house, but you didn't invite us. What's the meaning of this? As soon as they walked into the house, the woman in the lead said bitterly. While talking, she sat straight on the sofa in the living room, and the 3 people who followed her in did the same. As soon as the 2 men walked in, they saw the alcohol and cigarettes in the corner. Their eyes couldn't help but light up. They picked up a pack of cigarettes and didn't treat themselves as outsiders at all. They directly opened the pack and took out a box from inside. After opening it, each of them took a cigarette, but the pack of cigarettes wasn't put back, but directly under one of their arms. Another woman went straight to the family and looked at the table with a funny face. What are you doing here? Looking at the appearance of these people, AI Xiaoxi was still young after all, so he couldn't help but stand up with a gloomy face. But before he finished speaking, AI Xiaoxi's father waved his hand, telling him to shut up. Lao San and Lao Si are here. Have you eaten yet? Looking at the 4 people in front of him, AI Xiaoxi's father slowly stood up and nodded to the man with the cigarette and the woman who walked over. We didn't eat at your house, and you didn't invite us to your house either, right? If we didn't hear your neighbor's words, we wouldn't have come. After all, we watched Xiaoxi grow up. We can't let her suffer such a loss, right? Looking at AI Xiaoxi's father in front of her, the woman who walked over smiled and said softly. Hearing her words, even Jiang Hai's brows wrinkled. Did these guys come here to pick a fight? At this time, he couldn't help but look at AI Xiaoxi beside him, and found that her face was also very ugly. The one with the cigarette is my father's younger brother, my 3rd uncle. My father has 3 brothers. My first uncle passed away early. My aunt and a cousin have moved to the city. Now only my father and my 3rd uncle are here. The one sitting on the sofa is my 3rd aunt. The one standing and talking is my father's younger sister, my youngest aunt. The one standing over there is my uncle. Noticing Jiang Hai's gaze, AI Xiaoxi began to introduce them. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Since they were relatives, why did she sound so rude? If you want to eat, then eat. If you don't want to eat, then leave. Like you said, we didn't invite you here. AI Xiaoxi's mother put down her chopsticks, stood up, and said coldly when she saw that her old man was embarrassed. Oh, second sister-in-law, why are you throwing a tantrum? We live in the same village and are relatives. We see each other frequently. Your words are hurtful. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's mother's tough retort, the woman sitting on the sofa couldn't help but say bitterly. This woman was Ai Xiaoxi's third aunt. It seemed that she was really troublesome. So you still know that we are relatives? Relatives? Our son-in-law is coming today. What are you doing here? Looking at these people in front of her, Ai Xiaoxi's mother couldn't help but put on a straight face and said unhappily. Ai Xiaoxi's father just stood there. There were some words that he couldn't say, although it would be seen as being afraid of his wife. If no one in their family said these words, wouldn't they be bullied to death? Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's mother's words, the woman just smiled and said disdainfully, Son-in-law? Where did this son-in-law come from? I don't admit that the guy sitting over there is Xiaoxi's son-in-law. The only person who can be Xiaoxi's husband is young Master Lu. Not just anyone can sit there. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's mother's words, the third aunt stood up with a sarcastic face and looked down at Jiang Hai condescendingly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was a bit confused. How could he be involved in this matter? To put it bluntly, this is our family's business. What does it have to do with you? If you want to eat, then sit down. If you don't want to eat, then get lost. Hearing the third aunt's words, Ai Xiaoxi's father's face turned ugly. He slammed the table and said to the four people in front of him, I say, second brother, this is your fault. We are your biological brothers and sisters. Would we harm Xiaoxi? Letting Xiaoxi marry young Master Lu is the best choice. It's in our village. It's better to know her background than to let her marry this guy of unknown origin. Let me see what they gave. Oh, Mao Tai? What Zhonghua? Have you seen Mao Tai before? You bought it. You're really puffing yourself up at your own cost. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's father's words, the woman sneered. Looking at the cigarettes and alcohol on the table, she couldn't help but kick the paper box over there. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned. Where did their confidence come from? Well, sometimes the confidence of these people came so suddenly. Without saying a word, these people immediately started to act pretentious. Jiang Hai was a little unprepared. I know better than you what kind of person Lu Laosan is. I also know better than you what kind of bad seed his son is. Stop making sarcastic remarks. You're not marrying your daughter. Let me tell you, this is fine. It's Xiaoxi's choice to marry. It has nothing to do with anyone. Ai Xiaoxi's father waved his hand and said directly. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's father's words, the four people couldn't help but be speechless. Second brother, I don't want to criticize you, but you should be more sensible. Listen to others' advice and eat your fill. You won't have a good ending if you're so stubborn. At this time, Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle finished smoking a cigarette and directly threw the cigarette but on the ground, completely ignoring the ashtray next to him. Seeing this, Ai Xiaoxi's family was very angry. After throwing away the cigarette butt, he couldn't help but sneer and say to Ai Xiaoxi's father, I'm not hungry right now, and I don't need your help. Scram. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle's words, her father's face turned even uglier. This was his biological brother. Not only did biological brothers treat each other with respect, he even came here to threaten him. Fine, you're the second brother. If you tell us to scram, we'll scram. But brat, you're not my second brother. If I were you, I'd pack up and leave immediately. Otherwise, we can't guarantee your safety. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's father's words, Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle waved his hand, indicating that it was about time. He directly led the four people out. But before he left, he looked at Jiang Hai and said condescendingly to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai laughed. Although he didn't bring bodyguards back this time, he hadn't seen anyone who dared to threaten him like this in a long time. Let's go. Seeing Jiang Hai's disdainful smile, Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. This family is crazy. He didn't say anything and waved his hand to leave. But before he could step out of the door, he was stopped by someone. Wait! Hearing Jiang Hai's voice, the four people couldn't help but stop. They watched as Jiang Hai slowly stood up. What? Have you thought it through? Seeing Jiang Hai stand up and walk over, these people couldn't help but laugh. They thought that Jiang Hai had thought it through. But when he walked over, Jiang Hai directly pulled out the cigarette in his hand. I brought this from my uncle. It has nothing to do with you. And that box, take it out. Throwing the cigarette on the sofa, Jiang Hai said with a gloomy face. Since the other party was riding on his head, Jiang Hai wasn't going to be easy to deal with. What if I don't take it? Hearing that Jiang Hai didn't give him any face, Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle's eyes almost popped out. He straightened his neck and said with a tough face. But unfortunately, before he could finish, Jiang Hai directly lifted him up. Hey, what are you doing? How dare you? Someone come and kill him. Seeing that Jiang Hai lifted Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle up, the other three people on the other side shouted. But unfortunately it was useless. Jiang Hai stood there with a height of more than 1.9 meters. These people only shouted, but didn't dare to make a move. Jiang Hai held Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle and shook his head, forcibly shaking the box of cigarettes in his body to the ground. The 2 cigarettes you took, I'll treat it as feeding the dogs. Get lost. Seeing that the box of cigarettes fell out, Jiang Hai didn't say anything and directly threw him into the yard. With a bang, the man fell heavily. After Jiang Hai picked up the box of cigarettes, he looked at the 4 people coldly and said in a cold voice. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the remaining 3 people couldn't help but look away. Fine, I'll consider you ruthless. I hope you can always be this ruthless. Don't run away with your tail between your legs. Just you wait. Second, you actually helped an outsider beat up your own brother. From today onwards, don't blame me for not caring about brotherhood. You're going to be unlucky. At this time, Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle stood up while holding his waist, and then said to Jiang Hai with a face full of anger. Of course, this was just a clamor before leaving. Jiang Hai took a step forward and scared the 4 people. Then, with the help of the other 4 people, he left Ai Xiaoxi's house with his tail between his legs. Watching the 4 people leave, Jiang Hai also turned his head and threw the box of cigarettes on the coffee table. But at this time, the lively dinner table became quiet. That little Jiang, I'm really sorry that you had to see this scene. Seeing Jiang Hai looking over, Ai Xiaoxi's mother couldn't help but wipe her hands and said somewhat embarrassedly. It was said that dirty linen should not be aired in public, but now, it's okay, it's okay. Every family has a few bad relatives. It's okay. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's mother's words, Jiang Hai hurriedly waved his hand and said with a smile that it's okay. But after hearing his words, Ai Xiaoxi's parents and her brother still frowned. Only Ai Xiaoxi didn't take it to heart because her parents didn't know how powerful Jiang Hai was. But she knew, so she wasn't worried at all, whether it was official or private. At this time, she was still eating, minding her own business. For the rest of the meal, everyone obviously had no appetite. Jiang Hai couldn't eat because it was too salty. Ai Xiaoxi's parents and brother couldn't eat because of this incident. How much could Ai Xiaoxi eat? There were a lot of dishes left on the last table. After dinner, Ai Xiaoxi's mother asked Ai Xiaoxi and Jiang Hai to go out for a walk and enjoy the scenery here, while they cleaned up the table. Chapter 574. Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi walked side by side on the country road. The breeze blew gently in the fields, lifting Ai Xiaoxi's long hair and brushing it against Jiang Hai from time to time. Feeling her hair, Jiang Hai didn't say anything. He just smiled and gently pulled Ai Xiaoxi's long hair, which made her roll her eyes. Your place is really beautiful. Looking at her, Jiang Hai once again looked at the surrounding scenery. He had to admit that Ai Xiaoxi's hometown was developed into a farmhouse for a reason, because it was really beautiful. According to the lyrics, there were mountains, rivers, and forests. Although the place was not big, the appearance was quite good. There were nearly 100 families in the whole village, so it was not a small village. To the east of the village was the Yellow Sea, but the beach here was very short and full of gravel. It was difficult to develop it into a bathing place. In addition, there were many reefs, so there was no problem to play in the water here. It was not enough to be a scenic spot, but the scenery of the sea was not discounted here. In addition, in the south of the small village, there was a reservoir. There was a small stream flowing down from there, making the nearby freshwater resources very rich. However, the drinking water here was not very good. After all, The fresh water was mixed with seawater, and the taste was somewhat strange. To the north of the village was a forest. It was because of this forest that the soil erosion of the village was not serious. To the south of the village was a road, and on the other side of the road was a piece of farmland. It was now autumn. The farmland was golden, and it was really beautiful. Several provinces in Huaxia had their own leading agricultural projects. For example, in Jianghai's story, the Heilong province was a big grain-producing province. The output of rice, wheat, and corn was the highest in the country. The annual grain output of the Heilong province alone was enough to feed the people of Huaxia for 3 months. The 3 provinces in the northeast were basically the same. The land of the Songnan Plain was very fertile, unlike the Central Plains, which had lost its fertility after thousands of years of reclamation. Unlike the current northeast, the fertility was quite strong. Aside from the 3 northeastern provinces, Lu province was also a major agricultural province. However, the grain produced was different from the 3 northeastern provinces. Fruits from Lu province might not be good in the south. After all, in Nanyun and the other provinces in the south, the red soil was specially used for growing fruits. Because of this kind of soil, fruits were very sweet and ripened quickly due to the high temperature. However, in the north, Lu province's fruits were the best in the world. Almost all the fruits in the north were transported from Lu province, especially after winter. Lu province's fruits and vegetables were the main source of supply for the north, and at the same time, it was also the source of export. For example, most of the vegetables and fruits from Japan and South Korea are imported from Lu province. Of course, the requirements are much stricter. That's for sure. Haven't you heard of the saying that a person's condition depends on the person's temperament? Look at how pretty I am. You know that our place must be beautiful. Hearing Jianghai's words, Ai Xiaoxi also smiled. Originally, Jianghai's shyness and avoidance when he saw her gradually disappeared after returning here. Looking at Jianghai, Ai Xiaoxi said with a smile. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Jianghai smiled, took her hand and said to her, "Well, my beautiful girl, tomorrow you must remember to tell your old mother not to put so much salt in the dishes." "Yes, I know." Hearing Jianghai's words, Ai Xiaoxi also said with a smile. "Speaking of which, that young Master Lu, who the hell is he? Your ex-boyfriend?" Looking at Ai Xiaoxi's appearance, Jianghai hesitated for a moment. He felt that it was better to ask clearly, otherwise, it would be a thorn in his heart. "No, I'm not blind. That young Master Lu is called Lu Zheng, the son of Lu Laosan, the village chief of our village. He was a bad guy when he was young. I went to primary school with him, and went to junior high school together. When we were in junior high school, he pursued me. Later, after I graduated from junior high school, and went to high school in the city, he even asked his father to come to my house to propose marriage, but my father rejected him. Later, after I graduated from high school and went to university, I thought this matter was over, but I didn't expect that when I came back last year when something happened to my family, I met him again. In the end, he kept pestering me. But I heard you ask about him. Are you jealous?" Hearing that Jianghai cared about young Master Lu, Ai Xiaoxi naturally didn't think that Jianghai was afraid. What a joke! When Jianghai was abroad, he dared to hold a gun and fight with the Grey Gang. Why would he be afraid of a village chief? Moreover, she also heard that Jianghai had some connections with the higher-ups. Since he wasn't afraid, then Jianghai might ask now because he was jealous. A little bit. Hearing her words, Jianghai rubbed his nose. There was nothing to deny. He was very domineering. Don't worry, in life, I'm your woman, and in death, I'm also your woman, unless you don't want me anymore." Hearing Jianghai's words, to be honest, Ai Xiaoxi was very touched, although she was still a little unsure about her relationship with Jianghai. But as she said, unless Jianghai didn't want her, otherwise, she was still very willing to be by Jianghai's side. "I definitely won't abandon you." Feeling the feelings of the girl beside him, Jianghai pulled her into his arms. The two of them walked on the small path in the field, leaning against each other as they walked. At this moment, the two of them seemed to have opened their hearts and thoughts. Next, AI Xiaoxi told Jiang Hai about her relatives. AI Xiaoxi's family had a total of 5 relatives. Her father originally had 3 relatives, her eldest uncle, her third uncle, and her youngest aunt. But her eldest uncle passed away in an accident a long time ago. She heard that there was a mining factory nearby, and someone wanted to open a mine and recruit miners. In the end, her eldest uncle went there. But in less than 3 months, the mine collapsed, and her eldest uncle never came back. About 10 years ago, her aunt sold the house and brought her cousin to town. A few years ago, Qianlai and Qingming would still come back to visit, but 5 or 6 years ago, she stopped coming back. It was said that she had married someone else, and she didn't want to have any contact with this place anymore. As for her third uncle and her youngest aunt, they were 2 idiots and 2 henchmen. Her third uncle responded to the town's call and bought a few cows to raise at home. In a year and a half, he earned about 60 to 70,000 yuan. With this kind of money, he could be considered a high-income group in the small village. The reason why he fawned on village head Lu was because the only milk station in the village was run by village head Lu's nephew. In order to earn more money, what was the point of selling a niece? Especially when her third aunt was on the side. Her sister-in-law was mainly doing this because her sister-in-law was helping out in the grain field of the village head's family. It could be considered as working there. If she didn't curry favor with the village head, who else would she curry favor with? In order to earn more money, these 2 families were willing to sell anyone, let alone relatives. In addition, AI Xiaoxi had 3 relatives on her mother's side. They were her eldest uncle, her aunt, and her youngest uncle. They were also very snobbish and stingy. When her mother married into the family, her family didn't agree, so they had a falling out. Over the years, things gradually eased up, but it wasn't over yet. AI Xiaoxi's family was in trouble. AI Xiaoxi's mother went to borrow money, and in the end, the 3 families came back with 1,000 yuan. At the same time, they directly blocked AI Xiaoxi's mother out of the door, as if she didn't exist. They were very snobbish. Because of this, AI Xiaoxi's relationship with the 5 relatives on her side was quite bad. At most, she didn't have any contact with her uncle and aunt. But on her uncle and aunt's side, there was the problem of pimping. Listening to AI Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but sigh. The world was really too kind. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but think of his relatives. When he was at his most helpless, these people chose to stand by and watch. This was also the reason why Jiang Hai didn't plan to give them a single cent after he became rich. Even if one of them lent a helping hand, it wasn't to burden the other party too much, even if it was just to do their best. Now that Jiang Hai was rich, he definitely wouldn't forget their kindness. But they didn't sometimes. Relatives were like this. When you needed them, they would disappear. When you didn't need them, they would appear. Of course, not all relatives in the world were bad. It was just that Jiang Hai and AI Xiaoxi were unlucky to meet such relatives. Now AI Xiaoxi had Jiang Hai's help. And back then Jiang Hai could be considered to have sold his body with Qi Li's help. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai unconsciously thought of Qi Li. Qi Li's frosty face that had never melted in 10,000 years in his heart had unknowingly changed into another appearance. If it's possible, I'd better settle things with Qi Li as soon as possible. If she wasn't my wife, she's still a friend worth making. Although he was holding AI Xiaoxi in his arms, Jiang Hai's thoughts had already drifted back to Ice City, where he and Qi Li had made a promise. Just as Jiang Hai and AI Xiaoxi were immersed in this warm feeling, a voice suddenly sounded. Xiaoxi. Hearing this voice, Jiang Hai and AI Xiaoxi couldn't help but turn around. Then, a young man came into the sight of Jiang Hai and AI Xiaoxi. This young man looked to be about 20 years old. He still looked very energetic, but there was a sense of decadence on his body. It was obvious that he was a college student who hadn't graduated yet. When he looked at AI Xiaoxi, in addition to a trace of joy, there was also annoyance, pity, regret, excitement, and so on. All kinds of emotions were mixed together. The way he looked at AI Xiaoxi seemed to melt her. But when he looked at Jiang Hai, his eyes were filled with envy, jealousy, and hatred. He couldn't wait to bite Jiang Hai to death. Chapter 575. Jiang Hai is very sure that he doesn't know this young man. And this young man is now hating him so much. There is only one possibility. It's because of AI Xiaoxi. He has to admit that AI Xiaoxi is very beautiful. Plus these days, she has been eating Jiang Hai's beef every day. Plus the company's regular physical classes and so on, making her even more outstanding. So it's natural for her to be envied. This is that Lu something? Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai asked AI Xiaoxi who was beside him. No, this is Yu Hongji, my college classmate. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, AI Xiaoxi smiled and shook her head, saying very plainly, it can be seen that in her eyes, Yu Hongji has already been put aside. This is just an acquaintance. College classmate? Oh, I'm just a classmate now? Hearing AI Xiaoxi's words, Yu Hongji muttered a little absent-mindedly. He really can't imagine that he is just a classmate? If you want to say it like that, there is also a high school classmate. After thinking for a moment, AI Xiaoxi said to Jiang Hai again. Let me introduce myself. My name is Yu Hongji, AI Xiaoxi's boyfriend, used to be, still is, and will be her husband in the future. Walking down the aisle with her, the only person who can give her happiness is me. So I ask you to leave her side. Immediately. Taking a deep breath, this person named Yu Hongji looked at Jiang Hai with a serious face and said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai smiled. It seems that he still has a lot of love rivals. Sorry, I don't think you can give AI Xiaoxi any happiness. AI Xiaoxi is my woman, used to be, is now, and will naturally be in the future. So I have to trouble you to put away your unwarranted self-confidence. The one who has to leave now is you, not me. Looking at Yu Hongji, Jiang Hai said in a deep voice. Hearing Jiang Hai's exact words, Yu Hongji couldn't help but gnash his teeth in anger. Yu Hongji and AI Xiaoxi were indeed childhood sweethearts. They were classmates in high school. Yu Hongji's grandfather and grandmother were also from this area, but not from this village. Later on, his father was admitted to university and became successful. He went to the capital to work and met Yu Hongji's mother. Later on, they got married and had a child. As the couple was busy with work, they left the child in the care of his grandparents. But after all, living in the countryside wasn't too good. So they bought a house in Wei City and brought the child over. At the same time, they watched Yu Hongji go to school. At that time, Yu Hongji fell in love with AI Xiaoxi, but AI Xiaoxi still prioritized her studies. Later, the two of them were admitted to a university in the capital together and became classmates. After another year, they had a foundation of 4 years. Moreover, Yu Hongji's family background and character were both quite good. Hence, AI Xiaoxi agreed to see how things would go for the time being. However, not long after they started dating, something happened in AI Xiaoxi's family. Later on, AI Xiaoxi asked for money. However, Yu Hongji's family didn't intend to lend her money, so the two of them broke up. There was nothing to talk about. It was originally like this. They broke up if they weren't suitable for each other. Even if the earth was gone, no one would care about anything. Just like that saying, after breaking up with her today, he missed her on the first day, on the second day, on the third day, and on the fourth day. League of Legends was really fun. This was reality. No matter who broke up with the other, they could live on. However, Yu Hongji was still a sentimental person. After breaking up, it was obvious that he was hit hard. He looked for AI Xiaoxi for many days and finally found her. However, he was hit hard by Qili. Since then, he had been in a daze. He became grumpy in school and didn't want to interact with his classmates. Every day, other than daydreaming, he would lie in the dorm. At this point, his parents were afraid that he would take things too hard. Therefore, taking advantage of the recent double festival and the school's holidays, he was sent to stay with his grandfather for a few days. As for his grandparents, although they lived in the city when he was in school, after he left, they moved back to their hometown. After eating at home, Yu Hongji strolled around. Unknowingly, he walked to the place AI Xiaoxi used to tell him about her hometown. Looking at her beautiful hometown, walking on the path she used to walk on, breathing in the air that used to envelop her, Yu Hongji missed her more and more. He missed her more and more. He couldn't forget her. Just when he really wanted to see her again, she really appeared. However, there was an extra Jiang Hai by her side. Well, from Yu Hongji's perspective, Jiang Hai was really a heinous bastard. Two childhood sweethearts, two people who loved each other, had differences because of some trivial family matters. At this time the evil Jiang Hai appeared. Like a bad guy, he used money to take everything that belonged to Ai Xiaoxi. Now he really wanted to roar. 30 years to the west, 30 years to the east, don't bully the young for being poor. Unfortunately, this was reality, not the YY novel he read. The male lead of this novel was not called Yu Hongji. Therefore, he was destined to become a shadow that belonged exclusively to Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi. Yu Hongji, you better stop fooling around. Your mother was right. We don't belong in the same family, so we're not suitable for each other. So, since we've broken up, let's just be normal classmates. Your feelings for me now. In the end, the one who will be hurt is you, because I really don't like you. Seeing that Yu Hongji and Jiang Hai were at daggers drawn, Ai Xiaoxi couldn't help but walk to Jiang Hai's side and take the initiative to hold Jiang Hai's arm. In her opinion, ever since Yu Hongji's mother said those words, it was impossible for her and Yu Hongji to be together. In this world, there were not so many melodramatic 8 o'clock TV dramas that happened in reality. At least, Ai Xiaoxi would never believe it. Well, with her words, in Yu Hongji's eyes, his identity as the protagonist was confirmed. At this time, a huge Meng 13 was written on his face. Seeing that he was already a little dumbfounded, Jiang Hai sighed and walked around him with Ai Xiaoxi. Sometimes love was like this. It was not as beautiful as you imagined. This was also a lesson that Jiang Hai taught him. Regardless of whether Yu Hongji would write a novel on some website after he went back, writing his bitter experience in order to take revenge on Jiang Hai. At this time, Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi had finished shopping and walked back to Ai Xiaoxi's home. As soon as they walked in, Ai Xiaoxi's parents, who were originally talking, stopped talking and then smiled to welcome Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi. After that, the whole family sat on the sofa and watched TV as if nothing had happened. Of course, when they were watching TV, they also distributed the gifts. The gift for Ai Xiaoxi's father was a cigarette and a bottle of wine. Other than that, the gift for Ai Xiaoxi's mother was a cashmere sweater, while the gift for Ai Xiaoxi's brother was a video game console that Jiang Hai had specially bought for him. The AIX in charge in Kennecott cost more than 4,000 RMB. Jiang Hai swiped his card and took it away. There were also a few games inside. Sure enough, Ai Xiaoxi couldn't stay calm when he saw the game console. Ever since he got sick, he couldn't do any work. He couldn't do any physical labor. In addition, he was not willing to study, so he did not continue to go to school. Instead, he recuperated at home. But to be honest, staying at home all day was quite boring. Having a game console was indeed much better. At that moment, he wanted to play with it, but was beaten back by his father. What a joke! His father still wanted to watch TV. Although he was beaten back, he was still very excited. He was much closer to Jiang Hai than before. He knew that his sister would definitely not buy such a thing for him, so it must have been Jiang Hai who bought it. Brother-in-law, we don't have anything to play here on normal days. When you get up tomorrow morning, I'll take you to gather seafood at the beach. Well, a game console was given out, and he didn't even need to pay a change of name. Ai Xiaoxi had already called Jiang Hai brother-in-law. Gather seafood at the beach? Hearing that, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be curious, because he didn't know what it was either. We live by the sea. Every day the tide rises and falls. Taking advantage of the ebb tide, you can go to the beach and pick up a lot of delicious food, such as some razor clams, small shellfish, crabs, and so on. It's very fun. Seeing that Jiang Hai seemed to be interested, Ai Xiaoxi also explained to him with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. Although he had lived by the sea for a year, he really hadn't gathered seafood at the beach even once. Because if he wanted to eat something, he would just go into the sea to get it. It was much more convenient. Secondly, foreigners didn't eat those small shells and so on. So Jiang Hai really hadn't tried these. Now is the time when crabs are fat. You can go play and catch some small crabs back. I'll make crab sauce for you to eat." Hearing Jiang Hai's words and seeing that Jiang Hai was very interested, Ai Xiaoxi's mother couldn't help but say with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also remembered. Indeed, mid-autumn was the time when crabs were the most fat. A few years ago, when his father was still alive, he was willing to bring him to buy some crabs during this time. Of course, they mainly ate river crabs, which were not expensive in Bing City. Later on, they started to eat sea crabs, which were the so-called swimming crabs. But it was a custom to eat crabs wherever you go. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai hadn't eaten crab sauce yet. He could try some tomorrow. If it was really delicious, he could also bring some back to Winthrop to eat. This was also good. As the family chatted, the sky unknowingly turned dark. At around 10 o'clock, the family took a shower and went back to sleep. Not sure if it was because she was open-minded, or had already treated Jiang Hai as her son-in-law. Ai Xiaoxi's mother directly let Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi stay in her room. Of course, the two didn't do anything. The walls here were not so thick. Chapter 576. Brother-in-law, did you sleep well last night? Looking at Jiang Hai coming out of the room, Ai Xiaowi, who was squatting by the drainage ditch outside the yard and brushing his teeth, asked with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also stopped yawning, and then smiled brightly. Did you sleep well last night? It shouldn't be considered a good sleep. Although we are in the countryside, the air here is quite good. It is quiet at night, and the quality of sleep is quite good. It is much better than when I was in high school in the city. Seeing Jiang Hai's slightly embarrassed expression, Ai Xiaowi continued to speak. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai did not say anything. To be honest, he did not sleep well last night. At 10 o'clock at night, he hugged Ai Xiaoxi and went to sleep. Her soft and fragrant body was in his arms, but next door was her parents. Her bed was made of wood. Perhaps it had been in disrepair for a long time. When she got on the bed, there were some noises. Jiang Hai didn't dare to make any moves. But an energetic young man hugging a beautiful girl and doing nothing for the whole night was not a good night's sleep. In a daze, he did not know when he fell asleep. Because this place was located in the east of Huaxia. Although Huaxia was a big place, there was only one time zone, which was Beijing time. Therefore, it was inevitable that the sun would rise early in the east. During the hottest time of summer, the sun would rise at about 3 o'clock in the morning in Bing City. It was almost the same here. At 3 o'clock the sun rose. The chickens in the village began to crow. When the chickens started to crow, they woke up the dogs. At 4 o'clock, the dogs started to bark. When the dogs barked, they woke up the cows. At 5 o'clock, the villagers who were busy with farming had already woken up. They were herding the cows and going to the fields. Jiang Hai calculated that he had only slept for about 3 hours. It was still a light sleep. Now he was very proud of his foresight. There were chickens, dogs, and cows in his manor. But no matter if it was chickens or cows, they were all far away from where he lived. At least they wouldn't wake him up in the morning. Unlike now, it was too torturous. Jiang Hai went outside to enjoy the breeze for a while. After calming down temporarily, he returned to his room, took a cup of hot water, and started brushing his teeth. Originally, there was nothing in Xiaoxi's house. But since Ai Xiaoxi got money from Jiang Hai, her family's life improved a lot. Although the TV and fridge were still the same, the original earthen stove had been replaced with natural gas. There was also a water heater and a tub in the bathroom. At least he could bathe all year round. He could wash his face and brush his teeth in the morning, and wash his feet at night. There was no problem. This was indeed a lot more convenient. After Jiang Hai took the cup of hot water, he didn't brush his teeth outside like Ai Xiaowi. Instead, he brushed his teeth in the bathroom. After everything was cleaned up, Jiang Hai appeared in the living room. Seeing that Jiang Hai had woken up, Ai Xiaoxi's mother also said a few words to Jiang Hai. The general idea was to ask if he slept well last night, and why he didn't sleep a little longer. Then she went to the kitchen to get busy. Ai Xiaoxi's house didn't have much land. The land had been rented out. Anyway, they didn't rely on the land to make money. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't seem to be in good spirits, AI Xiaoxi's mother asked him to rest. Then she went into the kitchen, saying that she would wake up to make noodles for Jiang Hai. Of course, AI Xiaoxi had secretly told her last night to make the dishes bland. Otherwise, Jiang Hai wouldn't have anything to eat here. Brother-in-law, let's play the game console. Seeing that his mother went into the kitchen, AI Xiaowi ran in with a smile. Looking at Jiang Hai, who was still in a daze, he took the initiative to say. He wanted to play last night, but unfortunately he didn't. Now no matter what he wanted to play. Who knows if this TV can be played? Let's study it. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai rubbed his face and stood up. Since he had nothing to do, he also stood up and started to play with AI Xiaowi. He had to admit that AI Xiaowi was lucky. Although the resolution of this big-headed TV was very poor, the several plugs were quite complete. In the end, they installed the game console. After installing it, they connected to the Wi-Fi, logged into their accounts, and started to play games. The game they were playing now was called Halo. This game was quite popular now, whether it was on the game console or the PC platform. This game was about the war between humans in the future and the Star Alliance, an alliance of races based on Orion's religion. This game was very big. It was a first-person shooter game. In the past, Jiang Hai couldn't play this kind of game because he had 3D dizziness, but later on, he often watched 3D TV at home. In addition, he also played games a lot. Later on, he slowly got used to it. Now when he fought, he was naturally much better than AI Xiaowi. When AI Xiaoxi finally woke up, the two of them were already playing crazily. They were constantly yelling in the living room. "Be quiet, you guys. You woke me up," AI Xiaoxi said with some dissatisfaction as she rubbed her messy hair. Perhaps it was because AI Xiaoxi had been very imposing since young. So when he heard AI Xiaoxi's words, AI Xiaowi's voice instantly became softer. "Right, didn't you say that you were going to gather seafood today? Is the thing ready?" Seeing that AI Xiaowi became obedient, AI Xiaoxi sat next to Jiang Hai, casually picked up the manual of the disc from the table, and said while reading it, "Yeah, didn't you say that you were going to gather seafood today? Shouldn't this thing be done early?" When he heard AI Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai remembered. Didn't AI Xiaowi say that he was going to gather seafood? Why is he sitting here and playing games now? Gathering seafood is not urgent, brother-in-law. Brother-in-law, you are dying. AI Xiaowi couldn't help but laugh when he heard Jiang Hai's words. This also made Jiang Hai temporarily turn his mind back to the game. But he was still a little puzzled. Gathering seafood depends on the time. According to the time of the lunar calendar, the time of gathering seafood is also different. From the first day to the 30th day, the time of the lowest tide is different every day. Today is the 15th day. The best time to gather seafood should be around 11 o'clock. If we go there at 9 o'clock, just in time for the tide to fall. If it falls here, we can gather seafood at the back until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. After all, they grew up by the sea. Seeing Jiang Hai's doubts, AI Xiaoxi explained to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but let out an "oh." To be honest, he really didn't know these things. In fact, it had been shown on TV before, like Animal World or something. The moon was useless to many people. After all, it was just a satellite of the Earth. The reason why it was bright was because of the refraction of the sun after it shone on the Earth. Such a planet really didn't seem very important. But in nature, the moon was not ordinary, because it was related to the time of the tides. The tides were related to the ocean currents, and the ocean currents were related to the plankton in the sea. The plankton was at the bottom of the biological chain. If the plankton were destroyed, the biological chain would be destroyed, and the Earth would be finished. Therefore, the moon was actually very important. After listening to AI Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai also understood some things. He had been running the fishery for a year, but he really didn't pay attention to these things. But he just followed AI Xiaoxi and AI Xiaowi's instructions. The two siblings knew these things very well. After playing for a while, AI Xiaoxi's mother started to eat noodles for breakfast. People in Lu Province loved to eat noodles. Lu Province's steamed buns, and noodles were also famous in the country. Of course, The most famous noodles in the country were from Shaanxi, but the noodles here were also quite good. AI Xiaoxi's mother made braised noodles. Maybe because she listened to AI Xiaoxi's words. The braised noodles this time were very light. It was braised with lean meat, wood ear and daylily. It tasted very good. Jiang Hai ate 2 big bowls of noodles before putting down his bowl. Looking at Jiang Hai eating happily, AI Xiaoxi's mother started to think about how to cook tonight. It seems like she would need to follow this taste. After eating breakfast, Jiang Hai and AI Xiaowi played a game for a while. AI Xiaowi's mother was very happy. Then at around 8:30, AI Xiaoxi left with Jiang Hai and AI Xiaoxi. Each of them carried a small bucket with some tools in it. There were a total of 4 tools. One looked like a hook used to make a fire in winter, when they lived in a bungalow when they were young. A small curved shovel. A very sharp awl like a screwdriver. And a very thin kite string. These 4 tools had their own uses. The hook was used to hook things, such as the small crabs they wanted to catch. When the crabs got into the reef cave, they had to use this thing to pull them out. The small curved shovel was used to catch razor clams that got into the beach. The small shovel was used to dig out the shellfish attached to the reef. The last one was used to tie the crabs after catching them. Otherwise, these crabs might run out of the bucket, and all their efforts would be in vain. After everything was ready, Jiang Hai and the others went to the beach on the east side of the village. Because there were a lot of reefs and rocks on the beach, they couldn't walk barefoot on it. If they were not careful, they would cut their feet. Jiang Hai and the others walked with shoes on. When they came over, there were already some people on the beach here. It seems that today was the Mid-Autumn Festival, so there were a lot of villagers who came to gather seafood. Jiang Hai and the others found a slightly remote place and walked up. Now that the sea had just begun to recede, most of the sand hadn't been exposed yet, so their initial goal was still the reef. Chapter 577. This thing is called sea rainbow, and it tastes good after cooking. Looking at the dense black shells on the reef, AI Xiaoxi explained to Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also started digging, because he had seen this thing before. Sea rainbow, its scientific name is mussel, is a very common shellfish in China. It can also be said that it is one of the cheapest seafood besides flower clams. Basically, it is only a few RMB per 500 kilograms. In Bing City, it can be sold for 5 renminbi per 500 kilograms. This kind of shellfish was very fat and tasted good. It was very nutritious. Although the best kind of shellfish was more expensive than the average sea rainbow, it was not particularly expensive. This kind of creature did not have a shell when it was first born, so it could move freely. But when it meets a suitable environment, it will start to live on rocks or other hard things. They lived a fixed life for the rest of their lives, so reefs and the like were the best choices for them. Looking at the shells in front of him, Jiang Hai, to be honest, had not eaten for a long time. He also began to dig with a small shovel. This thing was very hard, so it was not easy to dig it out. However, Jiang Hai's divine strength was invincible. In less than half an hour, he had dug almost half a bucket. Seeing him digging so much, AI Xiaoxi and AI Xiaowi immediately stopped Jiang Hai. Under Jiang Hai's puzzled gaze, AI Xiaoxi could not help but roll her eyes at him. Why are you digging so much? We are here to catch razor clams and crabs. These things can be found at any time. Hearing AI Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai could not help but touch his nose. Yes, this kind of food is very common and not expensive. So the 3 of them stopped and picked up Jiang Hai's half bucket of sea rainbow. They kept the big ones and threw away the small ones. But even so, there is still about 1/3 of the bucket left. Together with the other 2, there is about 10 kilograms of sea rainbow. At this moment, the seawater on the surface of the sea also receded. Jiang Hai and the AI siblings also stepped onto the sandy beach and began to look for their main dish today, those crabs and other delicious things. Soon, AI Xiaowi made a discovery. After a shout, he directly used the curved shovel to stab into the sand. When it was pulled out, it brought out a lot of sand, but in the middle of the sand, there was a long pale yellow shellfish. Wow, what a big one! Looking at the shellfish, Jiang Hai immediately ran towards it and removed the sand from its body. Then he picked it up. It was a razor clam. Jiang Hai wasn't unfamiliar with it. Bing City also likes to eat this thing, and that's why they usually call it Shaoren Xian. Compared to normal shellfish, this type of razor clam is bigger and has more meat. Its shell is also thinner and does not need to be weighed. That's why it is very popular in the seafood market. This is a bamboo razor clam. It's the biggest one among all the razor clams. This one is about 12 centimeters long. It seems like this piece of bamboo razor clam is quite good. After taking the razor clam from Jiang Hai, Ai Xiaohui smiled and washed it with seawater. Then he threw it into his bucket and explained to Jiang Hai. How to find the razor clams. But according to him, Jiang Hai searched several places but didn't find any. Instead, it was the Ai siblings Ai Xiaoxi and Ai Xiaohui who found a lot of these things. Before long, they had already found 5 or 6 genes. Seeing that he really didn't have the talent to catch razor clams, Jiang Hai looked at other things. After high tide, there would always be a large number of creatures on the beach. There were all kinds of things. In addition to all kinds of shellfish, there were also small fish, shrimps, starfish, and so on. It can be said that all the small creatures in the sea would rush up here. Jiang Hai couldn't deal with the razor clams under the beach, but dealing with the creatures on the beach wasn't a problem. It didn't take long for Jiang Hai to pick up a lot of shellfish and 2 starfish. Jiang Hai couldn't eat these starfish. Most people wouldn't be able to eat them, but it was still good to play with them. Looking at the tentacles of this thing, Jiang Hai thought, if people with trypophobia saw this, they would be scared and break out in a cold sweat. This thing was indeed a trap. Just as Jiang Hai was happily picking up things, he accidentally kicked away a stone. Then, a crab the size of a child's fist suddenly jumped out from under the stone. Seeing this thing, Jiang Hai's spirit was lifted. He didn't forget his purpose for coming here. It wasn't for these small shells, but for the crab. Jiang Hai's speed was much faster than this crab. He stretched out his body and instantly pulled one of the crab's legs. However, this crab was wild and fierce. When its leg was pulled, it instantly turned its body, and its 2 huge pincers tried to clamp Jiang Hai's hand. However, Jiang Hai's speed was faster. He instantly threw it away. When he caught it, he had already pinched its shell with 2 fingers. This time, it didn't have a chance to clamp Jiang Hai. Look, I caught a crab. Can this be eaten? Holding the crab, Jiang Hai said to Ai Xiaoxi and Ai Xiaohui in the distance. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the siblings also rushed over. After approaching, Ai Xiaoxi clearly saw the appearance of the crab and said to Jiang Hai, "Oh, this is a sand crab. It can be eaten. You are really good. This little thing runs very fast." Sand crab can be said to be a very ancient crab. It originated in the Cretaceous period, the same dynasty as the dinosaurs. It developed and grew in the Third Era. Now this kind of crab can be found all over the world. In Huaxia, there are more than 70 kinds. Brother-in-law, continue to work hard. We will catch the razor clams. We will leave the crab to you. Seeing Jiang Hai catch a crab so easily, Ai Xiaohui was very excited and said with a happy face. With his physical fitness, he couldn't catch a crab except for using his hands. So when he came, he didn't plan to catch any crabs. But now, Jiang Hai could easily catch it with his bare hands. This made his eyes light up. This was an unexpected gain. No problem. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled. With the help of Ai Xiaoxi, he tied up the crab with a rope. Then, Jiang Hai no longer cared about the small shells on the beach and began to turn over the stones. It turned out that there were indeed a lot of crabs here. After turning over the stones, they often came out early. Basically, after turning over 3 or 5 stones, a sand crab would come out and escape. However, Jiang Hai let go of the small ones. He only caught the bigger ones. But even so, it didn't take long for Jiang Hai to catch a lot of sand crabs. These small crabs ran very fast, but Jiang Hai was faster. In terms of speed, these small crabs were still a little worse. However, just as Jiang Hai was happily catching the crabs, he suddenly turned over a stone and found that there was a crab under the stone. But unlike the sand crabs he caught, this crab was bluish-black and had a particularly big claw. After seeing Jiang Hai, It didn't escape like the sand crabs. Instead, it raised its pincers as if it wanted to fight with Jiang Hai. Hey, what kind of game is this? Looking at the crab in front of him, Jiang Hai directly stretched out his hand and picked it up. He looked at it carefully. It looked so strange. One pincer was big, and the other was small. It also seemed to have some aggressive tendencies. What the hell is this? This is a fiddler crab. It's also a type of sand crab, but it has a different classification. It's also edible. Just as Jiang Hai was feeling a little strange, Ai Xiaoxi also came over. Looking at the small crab in Jiang Hai's hand, she couldn't help but smile and explained to Jiang Hai. At this time, her small bucket was almost half filled with razor clams. It was about 5 or 6 pounds. She didn't need to catch too many. After all, Ai Xiaoxi was still catching. So after seeing some gains, she came to Jiang Hai's side and was responsible for helping Jiang Hai tie up the crabs. Although these crabs weren't big, it would be troublesome if they escaped. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai nodded. He knew another species. Although Jiang Hai had a manor and a fishing ground, he didn't know many crabs. Except for the swimming crabs he used to eat, he knew very little about crabs. He only knew about spider crabs, king crabs, and river crabs in his manor. He had seen all kinds of crabs before, especially sand crabs. They could be found all over the world. But he didn't think about eating them before, so he didn't want to know more about them. Now that he looked at them, there were a lot of crabs. After helping Ai Xiaoxi tie up the crab, Jiang Hai continued to search. After finding the first fiddler crab, Jiang Hai found a few more fiddler crabs. But most of them were sand crabs. But after searching for a while, he found another kind of crab. This is a big-eyed crab. Looking at the crab that Jiang Hai picked up, it was obviously bigger than the sand crab and the fiddler crab. Ai Xiaoxi also introduced it to him. Although Ai Xiaoxi was now living in the imperial capital, this was the place where she grew up. She was very familiar with every blade of grass, every tree, every living thing, and every species here. Maybe she couldn't name them, but she could accurately know what they were called in the local language. It was said that working together was less tiring, especially when Jiang Hai was quite interested in this matter. Unknowingly, his bucket was filled with crabs. Ai Xiaoxi's bucket was also filled with a lot of crabs. Sister, brother-in-law, it's almost time to go back. Just as Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi were happily catching crabs, Ai Xiaoxi's voice sounded. Only then did they notice that they had been catching seafood for more than 3 hours. At this time, it was already 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Just now he was so focused on catching that he didn't feel hungry. Now looking at the time, the 2 bowls of noodles that Jiang Hai ate in the morning had already been digested. Looking at his harvest, Jiang Hai's face was brimming with a proud smile. Chapter 578. Mom, we're back. Ai Xiaoxi shouted as soon as he walked into the Ai family's courtyard. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Ai Xiaoxi's mother, who was busy in the kitchen, came out. Oh, you caught a lot. Hurry up and separate them. Pour water and empty the sand. We can eat it tonight. Looking at the 3 barrels of seafood, Ai Xiaoxi's mother couldn't help but shout excitedly. Then she specially prepared some large basins and threw the seafood into them. There was a large basin for shellfish. Except for razor clams, there were all kinds of shellfish. There was a large basin for razor clams, and a large basin for all kinds of crabs. Whether it was crabs or shellfish, they could breathe in water. Although it wasn't seawater, they could still live for a while. After dividing the seafood, Ai Xiaoxi's mother also put some things in the basins. The basin for crabs was filled with salt, and the 2 basins for shellfish were filled with cooking oil. Jiang Hai knew that the cooking oil was for these creatures to spit out sand. These sea creatures lived in the sand. Perhaps others couldn't see it, but the things they ate were mixed with a lot of sand. If they were caught and eaten directly, it was almost the same as eating soil. Therefore, it was necessary to put some salt and cooking oil in these basins to let them spit out sand before cooking. After everything was done, Jiang Hai and the others sat there and ate lunch. This lunch was quite sumptuous because of Jiang Hai. Although they were all home-cooked dishes, the main meal was still to be eaten in the evening. Because the relatives in the family were a bit busy, Ai Xiaoxi's family didn't have many people coming to visit. After these things were done, the dishes were on the table. Jiang Hai and the others picked up their chopsticks and ate. This time, Jiang Hai was able to eat. It was a full meal. Although it was still a little salty, Shandong cuisine was mainly salty and fresh. This level of saltiness was already acceptable to Jiang Hai. According to Ai Xiaoxi, her mother only used 1/3 of the usual amount of salt this time. In other words, she usually used 3 spoonfuls of salt, but today she only used 1 spoonful, which suited Jiang Hai's taste. During lunch, Jiang Hai and the others enjoyed themselves to the fullest. Jiang Hai especially accompanied Ai Xiaoxi's father for a drink. After lunch, it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Ai Xiaoxi's father drank a little too much, so he went to sleep for a while. For Jiang Hai, drinking beer now was just like tasting the flavor. It's simply impossible to make him drink too much. His physical fitness is 4 times that of an ordinary person. Even if it's just his original alcohol capacity, drinking 30 to 50 bottles of beer won't be a lot. And after drinking 30 to 50 bottles, Jiang Hai has already recovered. Of course, it was impossible for him to drink 30 to 50 bottles in Ai Xiaoxi's house. He drank 6 bottles, and Ai Xiaoxi's father drank 6 bottles. Ai Xiaoxi's father lay down on the bed, while Jiang Hai continued to play games with Ai Xiaohui. As for Ai Xiaoxi, she was manually making mooncakes with her mother. Jiang Hai had to admit that Ai Xiaoxi's mother was really good at everything. Unknowingly, the evening lights were turned on, and the sky outside gradually darkened. This was the annoying thing about the eastern provinces. The sky brightened and darkened very early. At around 6 o'clock, the mooncakes were already prepared. Ai Xiaoxi's mother also went to prepare dinner for the reunion dinner. As for Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaohui, they moved the table to the courtyard outside. Today they deliberately locked the door, afraid that someone would come and cause trouble. But fortunately, it seemed that these people were celebrating at home. They didn't have the leisure and time to cause trouble for Jiang Hai. The first things on the table were mooncakes and eggs. The mooncakes were filled with bean paste. This was Jiang Hai's favorite. It was different from the ones bought outside. The mooncakes in Ai Xiaoxi's house were freshly made, so the outer layer was still very soft. It tasted very good. As for eggs, this was a popular way to eat in Lu province. In most places in Huaxia, mooncakes were eaten during the Mid-Autumn Festival. In Lu province, in addition to mooncakes, they also ate reunion eggs. After all, they were all round. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Jiang Hai also ate an egg with Ai Xiaohui. Then he ate a piece of mooncake. This was considered a festival. After that, the main course was the meal. Not sure if it was because of Jiang Hai's arrival. Ai Xiaoxi's mother prepared a lot of delicious food. She didn't know if it was because of Jiang Hai's arrival, but Ai Xiaoxi's mother had prepared a lot of delicious food. She had prepared prawns, tiger skin pork, braised pork ribs, pickled cucumbers with vegetables, kung pao diced pork, crispy pork, steamed yellow croaker, of course farm-raised tofu, spicy stir-fry made with the razor clams they caught today, and a big bowl of winter melon and sea rice soup. These 10 dishes meant that they were perfect. But in addition, there were some snacks. The shellfish were directly boiled in a pot and eaten. As for the crabs, most of them were cleaned and marinated into crab sauce. But there were still some that had their shells and gills removed. Then, they were wrapped in flour and fried by Ai Xiaoxi's mother. They looked really beautiful. Jiang Hai didn't lack meat, but he still had a special liking for these small crabs that he caught himself. He picked one up and took a bite. With this bite, Jiang Hai couldn't help but let out an "in" sound. The shell of this small crab was completely fried and crispy. The shell that was wrapped in flour broke with a gentle bite. The crab meat inside was tender and smooth. The most important thing was that the crab meat was now yellow. The so-called yellow was the seed of the crab. The male crab was called cream, and the female crab was called yellow. But it was hard to distinguish. In this season, both male and female crab were present. But since this was mentioned, then let's just say something. The female crab was yellow, which referred to the female crab's ovaries. The seeds inside were the small crabs. As for the male crab's cream cough, some things were like red wine and noodles in Shaanxi province. It was delicious if you didn't want to eat it directly, but once you thought about it, you couldn't eat it. Fortunately, Jiang Hai had already overcome this in his heart. He didn't care about eating this thing. After all, he was most willing to eat kidney in the past. It wasn't like he hadn't eaten bombs before, so his resistance to this was slightly stronger. These small crabs, although small, were indeed very fat now. If they were cooked and eaten with meat, there wouldn't be much left. But after being fried and stuffed into his mouth and chewing, the taste was really incomparable. The outside was crispy, and the meat inside was soft and smooth. Together with the yellow stuff, he didn't know if it was cream or yellow. The taste of flour, the taste of yellow, and the taste of meat made him subconsciously move his chin to chew. The more he chewed, the more delicious and fragrant it was. The more he chewed, the more flavorful it was. While eating these small crabs and drinking wine, the moon was already high in the sky. When Jiang Hai came back to his senses, the plate of fried crabs was already finished. He had to admit that the Mid-Autumn Festival in September was a good time to eat seafood. Hee, if I knew that little Jiang liked to eat, I would have fried more. We have enough here. Looking at Jiang Hai eating almost all the small crabs in the pot, Ai Xiaoxi's mother smiled and said, "It's not that bad. They could eat these small crabs often here, so they had already eaten enough." This was especially true for the siblings, Ai Xiaoxi and Ai Xiaowei. When they were young, they would often catch these small crabs and ask their mother to fry them. These were the best snacks back then, so now, they only had a taste of 2 crabs. They had already had enough of them. Ai Xiaoxi's parents were already sick of eating them, so more than 90% of the 4 to 5 caddies of crabs in the plate went into Jiang Hai's stomach. On the other hand, Jiang Hai tasted the dishes cooked by Ai Xiaoxi's mother a few times, but he didn't eat too much. This was because these small crabs were too delicious for Jiang Hai. He planned to learn it, and then when he went back, he would catch some small crabs and cook them. The small crabs in his manner would definitely taste better. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but think about catching some small crabs back tomorrow. Let's catch some more tomorrow. These small crabs are really delicious. Jiang Hai said to Ai Xiaoxi and Ai Xiaowei as he picked up the crab's feet in the plate. For a foodie, it was impossible to stop him from eating good food. Okay, we will continue to catch some crabs tomorrow, but the time will be pushed back by an hour. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi did some calculations and said to Jiang Hai, today was September 27th, and in order to avoid the peak period, they booked a flight back to Bing City on October 1st. There were still 3 days left, and it was enough for them to have some fun here. As for why the time was pushed back by an hour, naturally, it was because of the time of the tide. People like them who lived by the sea all year round naturally knew when the tide would rise and when it would recede. The time to catch crabs could only be chosen when the tide was low. Oh, then we will have to wait until around 10 o'clock. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai said to Ai Xiaoxi, well, it's about 10 o'clock. But can I trouble Xiaojiang tomorrow? Can you send me to town before you go to the beach? After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi's father took a deep breath and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her father's words, Jiang Hai naturally had nothing to say. What's wrong with that? No problem at all. What business do you have in town? Looking at Ai Xiaoxi's father, Jiang Hai agreed, and then asked him curiously. He didn't have any work to do recently, so why would he go to town? The chives at home are ripe again. I am going to sell the ones that I can't eat in town. Otherwise they will rot in the fields. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi's father said with a smile. Jiang Hai really didn't know much about these things. But after all, he also grew vegetables at home. He knew that chives could grow many times a year. Although Jiang Hai didn't care about the money from the chives, Ai Xiaoxi's father was obviously different from Jiang Hai. Chapter 579. I'll have to trouble you again tomorrow. My dad is really too much. He still insists on selling chives. Night fell quietly. It was always early to go to bed in the countryside. Unknowingly, it was getting late. Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi were ready to sleep. Lying on the bed, Jiang Hai hugged Ai Xiaoxi, who was only wearing pajamas, not even a singlet or underwear, and listened to her words. Let's not talk about trouble between us, okay? You're really disobedient. Listening to Ai Xiaoxi's polite words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes at her. Then he directly spanked her but with his hand. Feeling the tempting touch, Jiang Hai also felt a little restless. Noticing that Jiang Hai's hand changed from spanking to touching, Ai Xiaoxi's face suddenly turned red. It must be very uncomfortable to hold it in these 2 days. Feeling Jiang Hai's movements, Ai Xiaoxi leaned over and whispered in Jiang Hai's ear. Stop fooling around. Your parents are right next to us. They'll hear it. Ai Xiaoxi blew into Jiang Hai's ear as she spoke, making Jiang Hai's heart itch even more. But the problem was that it was really not good to do anything now. It was too awkward. And I know. Then let me help you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi also knew that it was not the time to use real swords and spears. But she still had a way to make Jiang Hai feel more comfortable. Especially when Jiang Hai cared so much about her and her family. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, Ai Xiaoxi slowly leaned over. Feeling the different touch, Jiang Hai's eyebrows also raised. The night was quiet. The next morning, Jiang Hai was not awakened by chickens, dogs, and cows. It was rare that he was not woken up by chickens, dogs, and cows. He slept until 6 o'clock in the morning. Don't think that 6 o'clock was very early. Jiang Hai and the others went to bed at 9 o'clock last night. Even if they were delayed by an hour because of something, they went to bed around 10 o'clock. Sleeping until 6 o'clock, 8 hours of basic sleep was guaranteed. After a simple workout at the entrance, they ate the big steamed buns that Ai Xiaoxi's mother specially made for them in the morning. Together with salted vegetables and porridge, they tasted pretty good. As for the even better crab sauce, they would have to wait for 3 or 4 days. When Jiang Hai and the others left, they were almost able to eat, but now it was impossible. After eating breakfast and resting for a while, around 7 in the morning, Jiang Hai took Ai Xiaoxi, Ai Xiaohui, Ai Xiaoxi's father, and 2 baskets of chives to the nearby town. As soon as he got in the car, Ai Xiaohui showed his interest in cars. What? You want to drive? Looking at him touching left and right, Jiang Hai asked him with a smile. Hey, I like it very much. Brother-in-law, you know my body's condition, so I can't do any heavy work. Dad's craftsmanship has no chance to be passed down. Because the school has been delayed for a year, I'm not interested in going back. So I'm thinking about what I can do. There are drivers in the small village, and I think I might be able to do it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaohui was a little embarrassed. He was indeed quite helpless. Although the leukemia in his body had been cured, he would have a lifetime of illness. However, he ended up with a lifetime of soreness and weakness. After all, the bone marrow was not his but a transplant. Even if they were originally compatible, it was not a big deal that his body was weak and unable to exert strength. It would even affect his lifespan. Jiang Hai could have cured him with Jiang Hai's spiritual energy. But although Jiang Hai's relationship with Ai Xiaoxi is very close now, his relationship with Ai Xiaohui, he still needs to examine it again. Jiang Hai is not a saint. He can't bear to see others suffer, especially when it is related to his spiritual energy. He must be careful. Then go and get a driver's license. Brother-in-law will buy you one. However, although Jiang Hai was reluctant to part with the spiritual qi, other than spiritual qi, Jiang Hai didn't care about money. Moreover, he didn't call him brother-in-law for nothing. Jiang Hai himself can't buy a good car for him. After all, he has to be a driver. A driver's car costs more than 100,000 yuan, so Jiang Hai doesn't care. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaohui's eyes suddenly lit up. Brother-in-law, I have finished the test. I got my driver's license last month. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaohui also said with some eagerness. Since he found out that he can't do any work and has no interest in school, he has been thinking of a way out. In the vicinity of the small village, there are indeed a lot of drivers. Driving to the city or town is 10 yuan per person in the town and 50 yuan per person in the city. If you rent a car for 150 yuan, you can sit 4 people. Excluding the gas, you can earn at least half of the profit. For him, this is an out-and-out good business. The only thing left is that he doesn't have a car. Ahem, Xiaojiang, don't spoil him. A car costs a lot. However, hearing Jiang Hai's words, AI Xiaoxi's father immediately interrupted. What a joke. Jiang Hai lent their family hundreds of thousands, and they don't have the money to pay it back. Now he wants to buy a car for AI Xiaowi. What a joke. Although their family doesn't have much money, they always owe others. As a father, he doesn't feel comfortable. Although AI Xiaoxi's father is a little henpecked, the men in Lu province are also a little male chauvinistic. He doesn't want to take advantage of Jiang Hai, no matter how rich Jiang Hai is. Dad, it's okay. Since AI Xiaowi doesn't want to go to school, he should find a job. He can drive a car. Cars are cheap now. Hearing AI Xiaoxi's father's words, Jiang Hai also smiled. Since he treats AI Xiaoxi as his woman, then he won't be too stingy. A car costs more than 100,000 yuan. Jiang Hai's cow leg is worth this much. AI, then let's buy it for him. We still have some money left at home. Hearing that Jiang Hai still wants to buy a car for AI Xiaowi, AI Xiaoxi's father can't help but feel a little depressed. The family doesn't have money. He really can't straighten his back as a father-in-law. After giving AI Xiaowi a look, Jiang Hai quickly changed the topic and asked about this episode. Buying a car, they can buy it after going to the town. After buying it, AI Xiaoxi's father will have to accept it even if he doesn't want to. Sure enough, as soon as the topic changed, AI Xiaoxi's father also began to tell Jiang Hai about the situation of this town. Although this place belongs to the urban-rural fringe, it is not really under the management of Wei City. Every city has a district under it, and the so-called management place of these places is the town. Jiang Hai doesn't know what the town is called. However, under the guidance of AI Xiaoxi's father, they quickly turned into the town. This town is not very big. There are no high-rise buildings in the town. Most of the houses are 7-story buildings, not high-rise residential areas. Although the town has all the essentials, it is indeed very small. On the street outside the town is the so-called market. In the countryside, there is a time limit for going to the market. Generally, it is on the first day of the lunar calendar, or on the 5th day of the lunar calendar, or on the 11th day of the lunar calendar, or on the 25th day of the lunar calendar. But because people nowadays don't really look at the lunar calendar, so they go according to the lunar calendar. The people in this town go to the market on the 6th day of the lunar calendar. When Jiang Hai's car arrived here, the market here is already crowded. Many residents nearby, or people from other villages, will come here to buy things. The residents come here to buy things mainly because the things here are fresh, and the people from other villages come here to buy things that they usually use, but have no place to buy. For example, there were clothes, shoes, cloth, toys, and so on. After all, this was a market. Meat, vegetables, and fruits were not the only things sold here. There were also stalls for daily necessities. He parked his car outside the market. Jiang Hai and the others helped AI Xiaoxi's father take the 2 baskets of leeks and found the area where vegetables are sold in the market. After casually circling the area, they are ready to start selling. Because they only sell leeks, it is not very troublesome. After looking here for a while, Jiang Hai winked at AI Xiaoxi and AI Xiaowi, and the 3 of them said that they want to go out for a stroll. AI Xiaoxi's father was quite busy here, so there was no need for him to tie down the 3 young people. Therefore, he let them go out to play. The 3 of them walked around the bazaar for a while, then went outside. After getting in the car, they drove to a car dealership in the small town. The car dealership in the small town couldn't be called a 4S shop, because it is not a car shop of one brand, but many brands. Instead of a car shop, it is more like a hodgepodge of cars. It is understandable, because the people who buy cars here are basically the people in the town, or the residents in the nearby villages. They don't know much about cars, and they don't need to go out to buy a car. The practicality of buying a car is the most important thing. There are only 3 or 4 car shops like this in the town, and Jiang Hai's shop is the biggest one. After parking the car, the 3 of them walked in. The first thing they saw is a lot of half-size cars and vans. Indeed, in the countryside, half-size cars and vans are more popular. Half-size cars are the so-called miniaturized cars. It is not the kind of big truck, but it is still a kind of truck. Usually it can transport pigs, chickens, cows, sheep, and so on. However, AI Xiaohui doesn't want to transport these things. He wants to transport people, and it is more profitable to transport people. So these miniaturized cars are not considered. Although vans are also good, the ones sold here are all vans with more than 8 seats. AI Xiaohui only has a C1 license, so he is not good at driving a van. So he can only drive ordinary cars. Logically speaking, it is very good to buy a car to transport people. There are also cars that cost more than 100,000 here, so it is quite good. However, considering that the roads in the nearby countryside were not all flat, Jiang Hai thought about it and felt that it was better to buy an SUV. Although SUVs were useless in the United States, other than going out to play, they were not very useful. But this is Huaxia, and it is also a good thing to have a big SUV. Chapter 580. As mentioned before, you have to drive a certain car to do whatever you want in America. You have to drive a car to pick someone up from the airport and go to work. You have to drive a car. Otherwise, people will feel that you are not sincere when you pick someone up. People will feel that you are not sociable when you go to work. You have to look at an MPV, which is a business car, when you pick up your child from school and go to school. If you don't drive this car, it will show that you are not considerate of your child's safety. You might even attract the police. Of course, this is also because Americans have more children. If you go out to play, you have to drive an SUV. If you don't drive, you will look unprofessional and be laughed at by others. That's why you have to drive a certain car to do whatever you want in America. Unless you are so poor that you only have one car, then there is no need to go out to play. After all, the cars in America are quite cheap. But in China it is different. People pay more attention to how much the car is worth when they drive. If you drive a Rolls-Royce to play, people will not laugh at you at all. Instead, they will be very envious. If you drive a G-grade AMG SUV starting from 2 million to pick someone up from the airport, that person will definitely not feel that you are looking down on them. Instead, they will be very happy and talk to you about how much the car is worth. This is not to say that the East and the West are different. It is because Huaxia does not have a car culture at all. This is the difference between the East and the West. Huaxia people pay more attention to etiquette than the West, especially those families with more than 100 years of history. But Huaxia people are really not that particular about cars. The only people who pay attention to cars are probably not those rich people. But at least the people from the AI family will not pay attention to these things. Let's buy an SUV. This car is big, comfortable to drive and fast. Most importantly, it is not a problem to drive on ordinary rural roads. After looking at the cars here, Jiang Hai set his eyes on the SUV. Want to buy an SUV? These cars are quite popular recently. Let me introduce them to you. Seeing that Jiang Hai wanted to buy an SUV, the salesperson's attitude wasn't particularly good, but it wasn't bad either. She brought Jiang Hai and the others to the place where the SUVs were placed in the distance and introduced them. This was because the country had been very fond of SUVs in recent years. Therefore, many domestic cars had the appearance of SUVs. Of course, what the interior looked like was up to different people. In this car dealership, 90% of the cars were made in China, including SUVs. The cheapest car was the Mustang F10, which cost 45,000 renminbi. In addition to the Mustang series, there were also Zhongtai, Zhishang Senya Beiki, Haver H1 Saab Changhe Maui, Zhongxing Chang'an, Ingji Ruifeng Lifan Shuiyuan Shentan, Orville Great Wall, Zhanqi Junpai and so on. There were plenty of cars that cost less than 100,000 renminbi. AI Xiaohui couldn't help but feel a little dazzled. He had thought of buying a car before, but if he really bought one for him, he would be a little confused. After looking around, Jiang Hai found that he didn't know what to buy, so Jiang Hai decided to help him. Although Jiang Hai didn't care about money, he couldn't spend too much money to buy a car for AI Xiaohui. This was because he didn't buy a car for fun, but to attract customers. Jiang Hai also couldn't spend more than 1 million renminbi to buy a car for him to attract customers. Therefore, the cars he chose were between 100,000 renminbi and 200,000 renminbi. Although there were many SUVs in this price range, it wasn't too difficult to choose. Haver's H6, H7, Geely's Boyle and Nissan's Xiaoka. Of course, he didn't buy this car. There are also Jeep's Liberty Knight, Ford Wing Tiger and so on. Jiang Hai is more interested in the two models from Haver, as well as the Liberty Knight and Wing Tiger. But if you want to buy a car, you have to buy it early. So Jiang Hai only wants a car that is already available. The only car available was Haver's H6. It was a 6-speed automatic with a standard sunroof. It cost 126,800 renminbi. If it was a rural household registration, it would save 5%, which was 6,340 renminbi cheaper. However, the insurance, license, and taxes were all not cheap. But since Jiang Hai said that he wanted to buy a car for AI Xiaowi, he didn't care about this small amount of money. He directly swiped his card and bought the car. With money to pave the way, Jiang Hai still bought the car in full. The car dealership was still very fast. In a short time, the procedures for the car were already done, and the temporary license was also prepared. The purchase tax was also directly paid in the car dealership. They had an office in the tax bureau here. After everything was done, they could directly drive the car to the vehicle management office to get the license plate. So Jiang Hai and the other two drove 2 cars to the vehicle management office in the town. Of course, on the way they deliberately filled up the car with gas. After arriving at the vehicle management office and paying the money, the other things were much easier. After choosing the license plate, it would be sent to AI Xiaowi's home in 15 days. Of course, Jiang Xiaowi could also drive here to get it himself. After everything was done, they looked at the time. It was almost 10 o'clock. Jiang Hai was still thinking about going back to gather seafood. So under his urging, the 3 directly rushed to the market. They were ready to go back after picking up Jiang Xiaoxi's father. But when they parked the car and went to the place where AI Xiaoxi's father set up his stall, they found that the place where the stall was originally set up was now full of people. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai and the other 3 were stunned. What's going on? Looking at the situation in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but whisper. He was tall, and his ears were very sharp. He vaguely heard that there seemed to be some shouting in the crowd. Hey Xiaowi, your father has a conflict with Zhang Hao inside. Hurry up and see. Just when the 3 of them were a little puzzled, a woman on the periphery happened to see AI Xiaowi, and immediately said to him anxiously. As soon as they heard that their father had a conflict with others, AI Xiaoxi and AI Xiaowi suddenly became anxious. They wanted to squeeze in, but one of them was a woman, and the other was weak and sick. It was really difficult to squeeze in. At this time, it was up to Jiang Hai. He protected AI Xiaoxi with one hand, and let AI Xiaowi follow behind him. He directly pushed through the crowd in front of him and walked in. When Jiang Hai and the others squeezed, they naturally pushed the people to the side. But when the people saw that it was AI Xiaowi, they closed their mouths. They were just here to watch the fun. Since the person involved was here, they naturally didn't have the right to say anything. Soon, the 3 of them squeezed into the encirclement. However, as soon as they walked in, Jiang Hai couldn't help but frown. He only saw that the 2 baskets of leeks that were originally set up at the stall had sold a lot, but some were thrown everywhere. The 2 baskets were also broken, and the carrying pole was thrown far away. At this time, AI Xiaoxi's father was standing there with his clothes pulled by a burly man who was more than 1.8 meters tall. His face was a little dirty, and there were some shoe prints on his body. Behind the burly man, there were a few people who looked like hooligans, standing there and cursing. The burly man had a ferocious look on his face. He clenched his fist and shouted at AI Xiaoxi's father. Looking at AI Xiaoxi's father in front of him, the burly man roared fiercely. You old fart! Do you know how much my clothes are worth? You've ruined them. Don't think you can leave without 10,000 yuan today. I didn't ruin your clothes. You tore them yourself. However, although AI Xiaoxi's father was usually a little stuffy, He was very stubborn. The people of Lu province were all like this. They were very hot-blooded, and it was difficult to make them admit defeat here. You old fart. Hearing that Ai Xiaoxi's father still dared to be stubborn, the burly man cursed under his breath. He directly threw a punch at Ai Xiaoxi's father's face, but unfortunately, he was stopped by a strong hand this time. Looking at the owner of the hand, the burly man couldn't help but be stunned for a moment.